Okay, good morning. We'll call our meeting to order. The first item we have is a continuation of our hearing on Department of Corrections, and we will have Secretary Jeff Zuma from the Department of Corrections. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for having us here this morning. This brisk morning. I'm going to go through my presentation this morning. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. Merle did a great job, a pretty comprehensive dive into a lot of the information, same information that I'm going to present, but I'll touch on some things that are pretty specific in there of importance. There's a few things different in my presentation that weren't in Merle's, and so I'll dive a little deep in that, and certainly along the way or at the end, take any questions you may have. I've got a couple of my executive team here with me this morning. I've got Keith Bradshaw, who's our executive director of contracts and finance, and I've got Randy Bowman, who's our executive director of public affairs, and both those guys are very knowledgeable. So thanks again for having us here this morning. These are the items I'm going to cover pretty quickly. An overview of the governor's recommendation, risk reduction programming, expansion projects, some challenges that we're experiencing, talk a little bit about those two offender management systems that Merle talked about the other day, and then the federal coronavirus funding. So the FY 2021 system-wide budget, really what I would add to this of what Merle said was those Winfield to Lansing projects are there. We are the status of those projects are we've transferred the title from those buildings at Winfield. They're now our buildings, and we've selected an architect and engineer to do development of both those projects. And then I draw your attention down to the correctional officer salary coronavirus relief fund, that $25 million, that's that offset that's allowed in the act. So that money came out of the CARES Act to us, and then $25 was pushed back to the general fund for that. FY 22, again, the Winfield and Lansing projects in there, that food service operation, moving that from the Larned State Hospital back to us at our Larned Mental Health Correctional Facility. Our cost per meal through our provider are about $1.61, and the cost per meal through the state hospital is about $4.59 a meal. So that net savings is about 2.3. Continuing on the budget, you can see reduced contract bed funding and reduction to food service. Our numbers are down, so we're able to reduce that funding. And then the central office staffing reductions that Earl mentioned, we had offered up 12 as a potential 10% budget holdback. Governor came back with the 6 FTEs, and we would do that through attrition. We've got some positions identified that are already vacant, so we could avoid layoffs for that. This graph just kind of reflects where expenditures are by type within our budget. The rent that you see on there is for our central office, for our parole offices, and the reconstructed facility at Lansing. And this slide reflects the expenditures by program, and I would just note that if you take the two largest expenditures, facility operations and healthcare, that's about 71% of our overall budget. Pie chart again reflects where the funding comes from, the revenue source, if you will, for our budget. State general fund is about 88%. Special revenue funds, which are supervision fees from parole or post-release supervision, sick call fees from the population and some others, that's about 8%. 2% are building funds. And then the inmate benefit fund and federal funds are 1% each. This chart reflects spending for reentry and programs for our agency. Reentry programs, we spend about 25% of this $14.5 million. Education is about 17% of that. Substance abuse programs, 16. The third time DUI treatment is 11. Sex offender treatment is 10. We contract with program providers, that's about another 9%, and then there's some smaller allocations in there. So why invest in that programming? I'll take just a minute or two on this. 98% of adults in our facilities will return to the community at some point, and helping them be better than they were when they came to us, I think, goes to good public safety. Over 70% of our male population and nearly 65% of females that come to us have not completed high school or have only a GED. 51% of the males and 41% of the females on post-release supervision, now they're back out in the community, are unemployed or unemployable. 20% of adult residents discharged to homelessness. They have nowhere to go, no resources. 41% of adults and 72% of youth residents have mental health needs. And over 70% of facility admissions report recent drug or alcohol misuse. 80% of the people that are approved for revocation, those that are out in the community that we've recommended revoking coming back to prison, are unemployed. We know that our population having a job that pays a sustainable living wage is a key to their success out in the community. So we've had some evaluations over the years from an outside entity, and in 2014 they evaluated our Thinking for a Change program, which is a cognitive-based intervention and skill building program. And it found that in 2014 found that 7% lower recidivism rate for completers and 23% lower recidivism rate for high-risk people. High-risk people being high risk to reoffend. Substance abuse program evaluation in 2016 found a 7.5% lower risk for completers and a 15.8 lower recidivism for that highest risk group. And then that update in 2020 found 7% lower for completers and 14% overall for our females. So we know that it has an impact on that population. That said, we're not meeting the needs of that population. We assess everyone as they come into the system in our receiving and diagnostic unit. And for those identified as need, having a need, the percentage that receive what they need while they're with us look like this. 48% of those that needed it received substance abuse programming services. 71% received education and employment services. 23% received that Thinking for a Change, and 67% received the sex offender programming that they need. Another way to look at it from the other side, for those releasing back into the community that had a need, 52% released back into the community still needing substance abuse services. 29% released still needing education and employment. 77% released needing cognitive programming. And 33% needed sex offender programming. Three predominant reasons why we're not meeting the needs of those populations. One, we don't have enough staff to deliver the programs or enough money for contracting that. Two, we don't have enough of the right space in our facilities where we can conduct enough groups. And then thirdly, often there's not enough time. We don't have them with us long enough. About 50% of the people coming to us that have those needs, we don't have them long enough to be able to deliver that programming. And that would suggest that there's a greater need out in the community, maybe when they're on probation, before they commit a new felony crime or their probation is revoked, to get them that treatment out in the community before they come to us. Again, another slide about the expansion projects, and I would just note on the Winfield expansion project, a real benefit beyond creating a living unit for that geriatric population and the cognitive care, and there is a substance abuse component in those housing units as well. But a residual benefit from that is today meals are prepped down at the veterans home kitchen, right adjacent to where they house their veterans. Our population goes down there and helps prepare those meals, and then they're all shipped back up, trucked back up to the Winfield facility. Again, some of the families of those veteran residents at the veterans home have expressed concern about having our population down there. To my knowledge, we've not had any problems with it to date, but they've expressed concern about that. And so part of the Winfield project is to build a new kitchen and dining facility up at the Winfield facility, and that will allow us to get our population out of the veterans kitchen. A Lansing expansion project is part of the old East unit up on the hill outside of Lansing that went offline when the reconstructed Lansing came online. It's what they called the X unit back at the time. Again, we've got architect selected and engineers to work on design for both of those projects. Some challenges for us. We have high caseloads for our counselors in prisons, parole officers, and community corrections supervision officers who are not our employees, but are employees of counties and other entities out in the community. Those caseloads are too high. When they're high like that, it's hard to spend some quality time focused on the needs and success of those on your supervision. Kind of alluded to it earlier, we have a limited capacity to provide the needed services both out in the community and in facilities. Retention of staff isn't an issue for us. We lose a lot of well-trained and experienced staff to other agencies, both out of our facilities in parole and at our headquarters. Difficult social distance within facilities during this pandemic. That's been a real challenge. The blessing has been our population has been down, and it's given us a little more leeway than we might have had otherwise. And then our infrastructure is old and we lack that space necessarily to do that quality programming. Talk just a little bit about the Offender Management Information System, or OMIS, and the Juvenile Correctional Facility System, JCFS, replacement project. And Merle covered it pretty well yesterday, but I'll just touch on it a little bit because I do believe it's important. So the governor has recommended supporting replacement of those through some upfront money that we have, augmenting that a little bit, and then doing that, financing that over a period of time. These are two key information systems for our population management, and Merle touched on that they're antiquated in terms of being able to support the software. One was developed in the 1970s, one in the early 2000s. Beyond that, they're antiquated in a couple of other ways. They don't currently reflect our current business practices. Things have changed a lot since the 1970s. They're not intuitive, they're not efficient, and then they're no longer supported. It's a $25 million project overall, about a 2-year development and a 5-year period for service debt payoff. Project projected to start in May of this year and completion in March of 2023. And again, we have a little bit of upfront money to get the project started. Governor's recommended augmenting that. There's an amortization schedule. I believe Merle had that in his presentation, but I'll show that on my next slide. That debt service payments begin in August of 21, if approved, and final payment would be in August of 26. FY21 direct payment to the vendor. Again, debt service over 5 calendar years, 6 fiscal years. In FY22, we'd access the line of credit and begin debt service payments in February. And again, final payment would be made in August of 2027. We had a legislative post-audit that looked at our security systems and found a deficiency where we weren't doing the security checks on these systems like they would have been recommended be done. We're not doing the security check because our IT believes if we do those security checks, we might take the system down and not be able to bring it back up. Federal coronavirus funding, coronavirus relief fund. We were awarded nearly $7 million and expenditures through 12 of 31, and that's what the grant office has asked us to report on, at least at this point, is about $6 million. We've used that for some pandemic hazard pay for our staff, those that have been working around that active and positive populations. We've used it for supplemental staffing, salaries and travel expenses. We've had to borrow staff from other facilities when we've had an outbreak at a facility, had a number of staff out sick or have loved ones in the home that they've had to protect. Personal protective equipment, equipment to facilitate remote work, lots of laptops, some printers, cell phones, what have you. And then some facility improvements and cleaning supplies for sanitation and what have you. At the bottom of this slide, there's that correctional officer salary offset again of $25 million that Merle talked about at some length yesterday. The slide, again, some more expenditures. Larned's South Unit operations. We stood up what used to be the juvenile facility at Larned. That was still in our possession but was unoccupied. We stood that back up. It has a unique design, some very small pods that we felt would be good for an isolation intake, bringing people in from county jail to create a buffer to mitigate spread of the virus. So we're operating there today. We've purchased some supplies, furniture and equipment, utilities came out of that. Some mobile devices, electronic equipment that we've purchased for parole officers. We've purchased mobile printers, and for our program staff, we've purchased some video carts so they could deliver programs to our population and facilities virtually. And there's a handout. I think we've given you that details a number of expenditures, and we can certainly talk about that as soon as presentation, as soon as I'm at the end of the presentation. So, yes, it's titled, it's got the Senate Ways and Means Subcommittee on Corrections, February 11th, Federal Coronavirus Funding Expenditures through December 31st. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thanks again for having us here. This concludes my presentation, and we'll stand for any questions you might have.
I think you might just wait till the end for questions, if that's okay. You got time to be here? Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's do that. Okay, next then we'll have Keith Bradshaw, Executive Director of Contracts and Finance.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, there might be an error in the agenda. I did not have any additional information to present beyond what the Secretary had, unless you had any questions for me.
Nope, I had you down here, and I also had Randy Bowman, same thing, just here for questions. Okay, then let's go ahead with questions then. Questions for the Secretary? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is kind of, this is probably, either you could answer this or Keith. I just kind of wanted to, I don't know that I saw necessarily an update on the hepatitis and where we're at with that and the costs involved.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'll have Keith speak to that if that's okay.
Mr. Chair, so regarding hepatitis C, we finished fiscal year 20 with 440 patients having completed treatment. Our goal was to hit 500, ran into a bit of a delay because of COVID when the pandemic broke. Off-site services, non-essential, non-emergent services were no longer being provided, so workups such as ultrasounds couldn't be provided. And then also with the movement of residents into COVID units, that really disrupted the whole COVID, the hepatitis C program. Since Centurion came on board and has been able to get themselves established, they've reestablished the program. They've taken a different approach regarding the workups and not requiring the full workup requirements that Horizon had, such as the ultrasounds. They're only doing those if it's necessary in the medical community's estimation that they require to have those workups. So they've gotten 46 residents treated, completely treated so far. We have 42 that are currently undergoing treatment, and we have 141 that have been identified as being infected. Statistics show that about 15% of them will probably clear the virus within 6 months, leaving roughly the remaining balance of who would need to be treated. And we're estimating right now probably about 200 residents will be treated this fiscal year.
And I know this has been a kind of a big issue in the past. So are you able to cover those, the costs that are connected to treatment for those, the hepatitis C?
Yes, we have sufficient funding within the budget for this.
Okay, thank you.
Can you tell me how much did we put in? A pretty good amount last year, like $6-7 million?
Our total budget is, I want to say $6 million this year.
And we're still anticipating the cost around $15,000 per patient?
So what we're budgeting.
Is it coming down at all? I mean, I know
The
there's.
pandemic has really disrupted the pricing, so we have seen with Centurion, they're using a little bit more expensive product called Maverick. The benefit of that is it covers all genotypes, so most residents were able to utilize that, and it's a shorter duration, so we can get more done more quickly. There are a few that require a more expensive drug and some that we can use a cheaper product on, but right now it's still averaging around $15,000 per treatment.
And the Maverick, is that like the 21-day treatment?
That is the 8-week one.
8-week, okay. And I thought I read in here somewhere, or in the report, the governor had not recommended additional funding for Hep C. Is that right?
Don't think that's correct regarding the hepatitis C.
Let me ask Merle.
Yeah, just to clarify, Chair, the agency had an enhancement request, the governor's recommendation. She did recommend an enhancement, but at $1.7 million less than the agency requested. So as part of that enhancement, there would be funding available for hepatitis C.
So, Mr. Chair, regarding that.
So we're short 1.7 from what they requested.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. The agency requested, I'm sorry, I believe the agency requested $9.6 million to fully fund the medical services contract in FY 2022. I'm sorry, correction. The agency requested $11.3 million to fully fund the medical services contract in FY 2022, and the governor's recommending $9.6 million.
And the recommendation was less for the Hep C.
So Hep C treatment would be part of that $9.6 million that the governor is recommending.
Mr. Chair, if I
Okay,
can
so my
clarify.
question, I guess, to you guys would be, how does this impact the treatment of Hep C by not funding the 11 million versus the 9.6?
There would be no impact. The difference between what we had initially requested and what the governor recommended is the difference in the population from when we submitted the budget to when we did our budget appeal and had the updated Sentencing Commission figures. So that change and that decrease is due to the lower population. It's not related to the hepatitis C. So at the governor's recommendation, we're fully funded for the healthcare contract, including hepatitis C.
Okay, and that will allow treatment for 200, correct?
At the $6 million, it would be more than that.
So even though you've identified 200, you'll have more if you need it.
At the current pace, we'll have more funding than we need this fiscal year, just because of that slow ramp up when we had those delays with identifying individuals coming through RDU. That's since picked back up, and the decrease in the emissions as well brought down the total number requiring treatment coming through RDU down pretty significantly. We're looking at probably 500 a year, and right now we're on pace for about 200. Of course, that's pretty limited data we've got to do that projection off of, so we're not quite sure how the future is going to hold as the population continues to grow.
What percentage of the population has Hep C now?
It'd be 141 of the total population, which is at 8,800.
So,
141 of 8,800.
so I thought last year when you was in here, we had thousands.
I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but we had a pretty significant backlog that had built up over time. Again, last year we were able to take care of 444 of them. Some, unfortunately, are released before they can start treatment. So we got that segment there, and we try to put them in contact with resources in the community where they can get treatment. We're not sure how successful it is. It's very difficult to measure and track that. And also with the decline in emissions, some of those numbers that we brought before this committee in the past include projected infections through the RDU process, knowing that we're going to have roughly 13% of new emissions are going to be infected based on the data we gathered, and we're still seeing that today. So those figures were factored into that. With the emissions having dropped off over the last 10 months or so, that's why that number has now shrunk down to about projected 200 right now, which is, again, based on a few months' worth of data.
Well, that's good news. I mean, I appreciate hearing them numbers. One other question that I have is on our Lansing facility. So, you know, the projections were less employees, which would offset our payments. Where are we at on that? How's that all working out as far as number of staff? Because there was to be considerable savings. Are we seeing the savings?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, there's quite a diminished staffing footprint there today as to what there was at the old Lansing. So a little bit before my time, but my understanding is when the Lansing project was initially conceived, there was a staffing number attached to it. And then along the way, some folks looked at that at least two different junctures. People looked at it and said that staffing pattern's not going to be adequate. So the numbers increased a little bit. When we brought, so that happened at least twice. When we brought it online late last spring, we had done it in a way where we knew we'd be reducing the staffing pattern, and we left positions open and moved people into positions, and it is a significantly less staffing number. And I'm going to ask Keith if he knows what that number is. He's looking. It is significantly less. It's not what was initially proposed years ago at the onset, the conception of the project, but it is substantially less than we were operating the old Lansing.
Yeah, because I was looking at, you know, actual FTE positions, and maybe they're not all filled, but, you know, in 2020, we had 3,438, and here in 21, we're at 3,364.5, which, I mean, that's some reduction, but nothing like the numbers we were looking at, I thought.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to have Keith look at that and tell you what that looks like. I'm trying to remember how many staff less we ended up with, but I can't recall right now. But it was quite a few positions.
So are you fully staffed now at the prisons? You know, I know we, like Vice Chair had mentioned, we scraped trying to get, you know, salaries up because we had so many vacancies. How are we on the vacancies?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we get a report every week. We have about 140 some vacancies system-wide. That's prisons, parole, and central office this week. That's up a little bit. We kind of have a traditional period where our vacancies will be up. I will tell you that those salary increases that we received back in the spring, late spring of 19, right after those just series of disturbances, and I think the problems at El Dorado in the staffing issues were really what brought that to the fore. That resulted in about an 18% pay increase for uniform staff, which made a difference. You can see when that, if you go back and look, you'll see when that, you can see when that pay increase was implemented. You can see our vacancies in the uniform ranks level off, and we are able to get those positions filled. So it was much needed, much appreciated. It made a difference. But we continue to have issues. We have quite a bit of turnover in our parole group. We lose a lot of people to other agencies who are more competitive with their pay or benefits. Same thing with our headquarters staff, and then a certain amount of our facility staff as well. Additionally, and there's almost always an unintended consequence to things. So when we had that 18% pay increase, that only applied to uniform staff in prisons. We have people in pay grades, same pay level in the organization, but that did not receive the pay. So their counterpart got an 18% pay increase, and they did not. So we have some pay equity within the organization that we're going to have to try to find some ways to address. Short answer, we still have turnover. We still have work to do to retain those well-trained, experienced staff. Part of that will be compensation and benefits.
Any other questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When it comes to the benefits, I think I don't know where they're going to go, but I think there are a couple of bills, aren't there, that are moving through, I believe on the House side right now, that would impact benefits over time. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, I believe there's a couple bills to go to the KPNF, I believe is what it is, for the retirement system. Yes, there's a couple bills in play.
I know, staying on this pay issue, I know you had mentioned in your presentation, and thank you very much, that about the lack of staff for programs, the lack of space, and lack of time in the system. I know I've heard in the past about the lack of time in the system, especially with women prisoners that they just get processed and then they're out the door, and so it's pretty hard to deal with the variety of issues that they come in with. I'm just wondering, since we're talking about Lansing, and since that was, as we know, a very, very old facility, and now we have a new prison there, in the planning, in the development, of course, you were not part of that, but now you're overseeing all of it. Was there, were things put in place to have, for example, to address the space for those issues that you mentioned about education? Because we know, I mean, it's nothing new. Education, housing, those are key issues and health for anybody coming out of prison. And so you also had mentioned that you said 80% I believe this was correct, and maybe I didn't write it down right, that 80% where their probation is broken, it's because, and they're unemployed. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, so 80% of people on parole or post-release supervision, those are people that we still oversee in the community. 80% of those that we are revoking or recommending for revocation to come back to prison are unemployed. And
I know we constantly keep talking about how do we keep somebody, once they've come out of prison, from going back into prison, because whatever we do to keep them out of prison is actually a lot less costly than them going back into prison. What's the annual cost for anyone that's incarcerated?
Around 80 is what Keith is saying.
80,000.
$80 a day. $80 a day, yeah. So,
Nice.
I don't know. You want to do some math, Keith? Is that about 20-some thousand? Okay.
I knew it was closer to 30.
Yeah.
So $30,000 a year to incarcerate someone, and the whole issue of addressing how do we keep them out? And those three issues, health, education, housing. So back to Lansing, and.
Jobs.
Well, if they have an education, they're going to be able to get a job. But I agree that training within, it's just part of the education piece. So back to Lansing. So is there more space there at Lansing to provide for those training tools, whether it's education or, well, some type of education, to equip the prisoners as they move out than there might be at some of our older facilities?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, no, there's not. So at the new reconstructed Lansing, there's not an adequate amount of space to conduct education or programming. And I believe that, that may have been done as a cost-saving measure to get the footprint of the building down. So we're working on that. We've got some partners. We have a vision for a career campus, an education and workforce training center there at Lansing that could eventually go to all of our facilities. We have some private and nonprofit partners in that Lansing area that are working with us, to include the KC Chamber of Commerce, the Wichita Chamber of Commerce, and the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, that are going to try to help us, with a fundraising effort to build a career campus. They're about 45,000 square foot complex principally for education and workforce training for that population. As an early start on that, a first phase of that, the funding for a modular unit has been donated. That unit should be on site in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we're going to place that adjacent to our minimum custody facility at Lansing, because there's no space for that training and education to occur there today. So we're on the move for that. It is it has a great degree of emphasis within our organization to enhance the education and workforce training opportunities. And along with that, Second Chance Pell grants are coming. Kansas was awarded. We have a consortium of 10 higher ed partners. For Second Chance Pell, 7 of the 10 were awarded grant money through the Pell. And then subsequent to that, Congress rescinded the restrictions on Second Chance Pell. So that is really going to open it up. And we know there's going to be a lot of opportunities for some post-secondary education, not necessarily always an associate's or a bachelor's degree, but some technical certifications, which are really a good key for a good job. That sustainable living wage is the underpinning for access to health care, housing, transportation, that good sustainable job. So we're putting a lot of our energy and effort into building that up, because we believe that's a key to reducing recidivism and helping these people be successful.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I hope that as, next year over time, that we'll be able to see that recidivism number, decreasing, because we know that that's key to keeping our population down in the prisons. And I think it's also helps to talk about the justification for why these kinds of, particularly the piece that you mentioned about the pay inequities, because we're now talking, when we talk about this other staff that's at the same pay grade, that other staff, they're not uniform officers that are guards, but they're providing those. Am I correct? They're providing those education and career training programs as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, you're exactly right. They're doing education, they're doing programming, they're doing pre-release, helping people prepare for release. They're parole officers that are managing them out in the community. It runs the gamut in the organization. They're providing all those other services.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree wholeheartedly with Senator Petty. This is a place we really need to use our resources. I mean, the return on the dollar by giving these folks some education and a chance is, I think, should be first and foremost. You know, I think that hopefully, if there's things that can be done, that we sure look at making sure we do get them their GED or whatever it might be to make sure that they are successful. Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's eye-opening to me how much money is spent once they get out. Do you guys ever look at other programs around the country and say, you know, this one seems to be effective? Do you feel like we're getting our bang for our buck on what we're doing right now?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, I do. We're using only evidence-based programs.
Yeah.
So they've been validated, if you will, by studies after the fact. So we're using things that are proven and true. And yes, we do look around. We're always looking for the next best good idea.
Yeah. So as you look around the country, you feel like that we're above average for what we're doing, or where we kind of fit in that system?
Well, yeah.
Really look at other states and what they do and how much they spend and their numbers coming out.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, I think we're doing a good job. You know, some states spend a lot more money on it. I mean, it's not a matter of necessarily just spending money on it. You have to have it resourced right. And I think at least in my presentation, I talked about we're not resourced right, and we're going to try to find some ways to deal with that. Okay. But beyond that, it's the fidelity of the programs, making sure that you're running the right programs that are proven, that can be validated as being effective, and then staying consistent with the delivery of those programs. What you find over time is if you're not monitoring the delivery of them, they morph and they drift, and now you're delivering a program that really doesn't get to the core issues and address it. So I know we're doing a good job in a lot of those, and I just see greater opportunities ahead.
One more question.
In fact,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I sit there and say, a guy goes to prison, he comes out, do you guys analyze when they come into prison what we could have done better before they got there in society? You know, maybe be working on some areas in that versus trying to take care of the cut afterwards, but so we don't get cut on the front. So it was just a thought process. I don't know when they first check in, if you do any analysis of that kind of thing, saying they weren't in school, the family life, any suggestions that might be coming out of that kind of thing somewhere might be helpful, just a thought. So,
Mr. Chairman, Senator, so we do a couple things, and we're about to do another thing. So when that person comes into prison, whether they're a returnee or brand new to the system, they get an assessment. We bring them into the receiving and diagnostic unit, and we assess all of their needs, and whether that's behavioral health, education, what's their work history, what's their family history, and that gives us a good assessment of what their needs are, and that really is usually a pretty good indicator of where they may have failed, if you will. And so then we'll build a plan for them based on those needs. Here's what we need to work this person towards. So there's that. So we know that. We also know if someone fails on probation, parole, that type thing, those staff in the parole offices will know, or probation offices will know exactly to that person what they're failing. And I think there's been some studies by the Council on State Government since they came in as to they're helping Kansas with trying to determine how we can help the system, reform the system, and get our best bang for the buck, if you will. So a couple things. We know as a result of those studies that there's not enough behavioral health opportunities out in the community. If someone has a mental health issue, those services either they're not able to access those services, or they're not available. A little more difficult to have those available in a rural community as opposed to the more urban setting. So there's some big time gaps on behavioral health. There's quite a few barriers to employment for these folks, and there is that education and training component, but there's also that stigma of having been in prison, and there's a pretty good segment of employers out there that still aren't willing to do that. And then even housing, finding someone who's willing to accept someone, rent to them, let them be there, particularly if they've got some acute needs like behavioral health needs. Sometimes it can be very difficult to place these folks. And so you take somebody, if they've got 3 or 4 of those things, and many do, it's hard for them to be successful and stay on the right track. And they may or may not be on a caseload for a parole officer or a probation officer where they can commit the time to them to really walk them through that.
Okay. I was just, what information you get, how you would pass that out to the community ahead of time so that different agencies could be working on maybe preventing crime a little bit. That was my thought, is you've got some information there that might help towards the future, and it was just a thought.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think, so you have some entities that exist that are always working on that. You have the Sentencing Commission, which I'm a member of, that is always looking on what's going on in the community, what are the crimes being committed, what does that look like. Today you have the Kansas Criminal Justice Reform Commission, that I'm also a member of, that is studying quite comprehensively what are some of the issues, and a lot of those gaps that exist, they're proposing some fixes. So you, and on the juvenile side, you have the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee that Senator Perry and I are both members of, and they're looking at how can we do better for that, to keep those youth from coming into the justice system. So you've got some entities out there, the Kansas Advisory Group for Youth, and a lot of folks, and they're smart folks that know it, and they're always making recommendations.
Okay. Thank you.
And sharing.
Thank you.
Couple of quick other questions. Number one, on your IT, your replacement, about $25 million. I guess not knowing what the new Coronavirus Relief Act is going to look like financially, if there's an opportunity to use some of these CARES or COVID dollars, would that be an issue for you folks, or is that something that we should look at for you if there is an opportunity to use these federal dollars for this system?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I don't think we wouldn't have any issue as long as it fell within the guidelines of the federal regulations for that, and those are usually pretty clear and pretty tight. You know, I think this latest round of stimulus is just now rolling out, and at least at this point, we don't have any indication that any of that will apply to the correctional setting. Now, that could change, and we could get more information down the road, but at this point, we're not anticipating receiving any of that funding.
That's why I said not knowing, and we don't
Yeah.
know. I just thought maybe I would ask you that in case we do have an opportunity there to maybe expedite this. Any other questions? Senator Petty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up to Senator Petty, that is on the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee. You said Perry or
I
something.
meant Petty, I'm sorry.
I know. Those
I know it's
Believe
Petty.
me, that Pat Petty gets.
I am so sorry, I apologize.
No, that's okay. But I did want to follow up on Senator Fagg's because I think this information that's gathered just reinforces the fact, another area would be Kansas Action for Children, that how important it is to invest in early childhood. Every chance I get, I'm going to throw that out there. Because we get them early, then we save them from going into our system in any way. But I am a little confused. You mentioned like the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, and now I'm seeing this funding source being referred to as a Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund lapse. Funds. So, Randy, or could you, or Secretary, I want a clarification. So are we talking about two different funds? Are we talking about the same fund?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Petty, I will ask Mr. Bradshaw to talk about that if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. So those are two different funds. The Juvenile Detentions Alternatives Fund is the old Juvenile Detentions Facilities Fund, which was redesignated in Senate Bill 367, and the purpose for which that could be utilized for was changed at that time. The $10 million swap that's in the governor's budget would basically allow us to use that $10 million to pay for juvenile graduated sanctions grants in the community in FY22 instead of using SGF, and be just a one-time swap, since we've got that cash balance there that under current statute we can't really use for anything else. It's just accumulated over time, mainly because this fund used to be used to pay for detention placements before the reform, and those numbers have trailed off quite considerably since the reform. So that balance has built up over the last several years.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify one matter real quickly.
Yes, Merle.
Earlier, you had asked about FTE positions at the Lansing Correctional Facility. If you look on page 405 of your budget analysis, you'll see that the actual FTE in 2020 was 525.5. In FY 2021, the agencies reduced that to 409.0. And just looking back in last year's records, it was an FTE count of 685, actual count in FY 2019.
Thank you, Merle. Senator Petty.
Thank you for your indulgence here. Just one more piece. You mentioned the Second Chance Pell Grant, and I think that's such a big item about how now you have the ability, or prisoners have the ability to use Pell Grants. So maybe you could provide us, not a little bit of information about it now, but maybe just in a written form about how that's come about and hasn't been available before, and the expansion it is for accessing educational opportunities for prisoners.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, we can provide something in written form. I would just say it's going to be a game changer for us. It is really going to put an influx of funding in to provide those certification training and associate credit-bearing training. It's going to be a game changer. So, but we can get something in written form, kind of show where it's been and where we anticipate it being, and get that to you.
Thank you. I think it's so important because, as Senator Fagg had mentioned, and you have mentioned about the needs to be able to come out, and we want to keep that recidivism numbers going down. This certainly is a tool that's really going to help there.
I agree.
Any other questions? Senator Fagg.
One quick question. We'd talked a little bit, you got a couple empty buildings that you guys are going to be developing a plan for, right? Either tear them down or do something with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, we've got a couple former work camps. One is near the town of Toronto, and the other is down near our El Dorado facility. And they've back I'm not sure what years before my time, but as a part of a budget cut, they were closed, and they've been standing there. And a legislative post audit recommending that those buildings be demolished. I think that's a couple of years ago, and they noted this past year that nothing had been done on that. So in addition to those two work camps, we now have the old Lansing Correctional Facility since we moved into the reconstructed facility, and it's the Lansing facility has great history, great architecture. It's not a modern-day prison, that's for sure. I'm glad we were able to move, but we've got to figure out what's the plan for that facility, because to leave it sit there idle, much like those work camps, they can become an eyesore. They can fall into disrepair. they can be, have an infestation of rodents and insects and what have you. So we're going to work on a plan for what to do with those buildings.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll go ahead and deliberate this. I don't think there was a whole lot of differences in there. I might suggest a few things that we do note in our report. One would be, you know, we're looking at pay raises globally, but I'd like to at least put something in there about this pay equity, because at least maybe look at it at omnibus. I maybe put something in on the IT funding, that we do look at federal dollars if there's anything available that might be able to take care of their IT situation. And I think that's pretty much it. The hepatitis C, I think they've said they've got plenty of funding for the Hep C, which it was a big concern. I'm glad to see them numbers going down. And I think you've hit on a lot of different opportunities for the education and the Pell grants, and thank you for getting that up and going as soon as possible. Anything else anyone would like to see as far as notes?
Just a clarification, Mr. Chairman. So on the pay equity, are you talking about, as the Secretary mentioned, looking at pay equity for those outside uniform staff?
Whoever was left out in the last couple of raises, I think there was
That was outside uniform staff.
Right.
Thank you.
Everyone okay with those notations? Is there anything additionally anyone would like to see added, other than concurring with the governor's rec? Seeing none, Merle, you got that down, what we would kind of like to see?
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, and we'll move on the agenda. So next item we have is a hearing on the agency budget for sentencing committee, and we'll have Merle from KLRD give us a budget overview. Merle?
Good morning, members. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, very good. Thank you. Yes, my name is Merle Riedel. I am the Legislative Research Analyst, and today I'll present a budget from the Kansas Sentencing Commission. Also joining me online today is Scott Schultz, the Executive Director from the Sentencing Commission, and Melissa Zosch, the Financial Officer from the Sentencing Commission. So if you could please pull out your budget analysis that says Kansas Sentencing at the top of it. Mine's got a bunch of highlights on it. Sorry about that. So looking at the agency overview on page 585, about midway down, just very quickly, we'll review what the Sentencing Commission is. So the commission tracks and assesses sentencing impositions using statistical methodologies to develop prison population projections and legislative impacts to interested parties, including the Department of Corrections, the governor, the legislature. The commission also administers a substance abuse treatment program created by the 2003 legislature. It's called the SB 123 Substance Abuse Treatment Program. And just keep in mind that is a treatment program primarily for folks outside of the correctional facility. So these are people on probation or parole. So in general, the agency kind of has two functions. And if you could, I'll get to that, but if you would flip to page 586, which is the next page, we're going to review just a couple of recent issues for this agency. Looking on page 586, paragraph that starts 2019 legislature, I just want to hit that last sentence there. The legislature passed House Bill 2290, which established the Kansas Criminal Justice Reform Commission to study issues such as sentencing guidelines and substance abuse treatment, with the final report submitted to the legislature by December 1st, 2020. That report was submitted on December 1st, 2020, initial report, and then a final report was submitted around December 1st of 2021. The Sentencing Commission has been heavily involved in generating that report. They have access to a lot of statistical data to help provide some data for the study of this report. So they've committed a substantial amount of time and helping facilitate some of those discussions. Moving on to FY 2020, last year, the legislature approved an FY 2021 budget for this agency that added 54,249 SGF, essentially for the elimination and replacement of an annual interfund transfer from KDOC supporting administration of that substance abuse, SB 123 substance abuse treatment program. So in essence, for several recent years, the Department of Corrections had been providing about $54,000 as an annual interfund transfer to the Sentencing Commission to offset some of the administrative costs related to this program. So last year, the agencies agreed to just request that that money be appropriated directly to the Sentencing Commission instead of going to the Department of Corrections and then being transferred to the Sentencing Commission, and the legislature approved that. The only other item I would note here is, like many of the agencies, Sentencing Commission was somewhat impacted by the coronavirus, led to some closures of their offices, which led to them conducting some work remotely. But probably more significantly, the legislature passed SB 102, which allowed for the delay of court proceedings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this delay resulted in some unforeseen decreases to the prison population, which we've talked about previously. So they've included some of these circumstances in their modeling when they create their prison population projection. So that's a very quick once-over of recent issues. I am going to have you flip to page 588. You'll see some of the performance measures there that address some of the functions that this commission takes. I would just draw your attention to, in the performance measures, you'll see the prison population projection error rate. They shoot for an error rate of plus or minus 5%. They are typically much more accurate than that at 1.6 and 1.3%. But you would notice there was some challenges for them in FY 2020 when there was a pandemic that occurred that they were not calculated or had not factored in at that point. Want to go just to the bottom of that page and hit on some of these performance measures. So offender population projection and forecasting. So to develop those projections, sentencing journals, a sentencing journal entry is completed and forwarded to the Sentencing Commission for every felony conviction. These journal entries contain information that serve as a basis for a centralized statewide database of all probation and prison sentences in Kansas. This database allows for the determination of sentencing trends, impacts of legislative changes to sentencing guidelines, and the 10-year prison projection. And then the next item down there, you'll just see the SB 123 Substance Abuse Treatment Program and Evaluation. The Sentencing Commission, in cooperation with the Department of Corrections, is responsible for management of the SB 123 Substance Abuse Treatment Program. And you can really think of the Sentencing Commission as sort of the administrator or bank for this project. So treatment is provided through a variety of about it's probably 120 providers throughout the state, and those providers submit claims to the Sentencing Commission. Sentencing Commission can validate and verify that information and then provides payment to the providers for that substance abuse treatment. All right, that's very quick once over on the sort of the background. So now we'll get into the budget breakdown. If you would turn to page 591, the FY 2021 current year. 2020 legislature approved a state general fund budget of about $9.9 million for the Sentencing Commission in FY 2021. Several adjustments have been made subsequently to that amount. You can see some of those adjustments. There is an increase of about $2.1 million based on the reappropriation of FY 2020 funding that was not spent in FY 2020 and has shifted to FY 2021. There's an increase of $120 based on the reimbursement of SGF expenditures in FY 2020 for COVID-19 pandemic-related expenditures. Pretty simple. The agencies immediately purchased some items to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, and then were reimbursed for some of those expenses in FY 2020. And a decrease of $8,545 as a result of the governor's July 2020 allotment. And you can see a breakdown of what those allotments were on page 593, really kind of related to some of those capers, death and disability benefits, and some coronavirus expenses paid through other funds. All right, moving below the box, we'll kind of really get into the thick of their agency request, and then we'll talk about the governor's recommendation. Agency requests a revised estimate of $12 million, including $11.9 million SGF for FY 2020. This is an all funds decrease of $6,603 and an SGF decrease of $120 below the FY 2021 approved amount. The decrease is attributed to decrease in offenders receiving substance abuse treatment through the SB 123 program, so a decrease of about 42,000, really kind of due to those delay in court proceedings caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So not as many people were being sentenced, so not as many people were sentenced to the substance abuse treatment program. So they saw a decrease essentially in admission to the program. There's also decreased contractual services expenditures due to the development of treatment modalities completed in FY 2020. So in FY 2020, they developed new and different ways to try to provide substance abuse treatment. Those expenditures completed in 2020 and were not needed then in 2021. The decrease is partially offset by increased salaries and wage expenditures, primarily attributed to an 8.6% salary increase, or an increase of $69,211. Salary increase is recommended by a third-party salary study as a means to aid with employee retention. There is also increased capital outlay expenditures, primarily as part of a federal grant that the agency received. A federal grant assessing the impacts of substance abuse treatment telehealth services in rural areas. So they received this federal grant to develop telehealth services in rural areas, and they're using these federal grant funds to assess the impact of that now. The revised estimate includes 13.8 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the FY 2021 approved number. So you'll see a list of major expenditures detailed below. I'm just going to hit a couple of these. Looking at the salaries and wages, the agency requests a revised estimate of $993,000 all SGF for salaries and wages expenditures in FY 2021. This is an all funds increase of $43,965 and an SGF increase of $51,242 above the approved amount. The increase is attributable to that 8.6% salary increase for all employees. This is the initial phase of a 2-year transition to a new pay plan. The pay plan is based on the recommendation of a third-party salary study commissioned by the agency. The study indicated that the agency has experienced significant recent staff turnover due to positions requiring individuals experienced in criminology and data analytics, which are skills that are sought after by other state and federal justice-related entities. The agency indicates that the salary increase would aid in recruitment and retention of these skilled employees. Looking at contractual services, agency requested a revised estimate of $466,000, including $388,000 SGF for contractual services in FY 2021. This is an all funds decrease of $40,523 and an SGF decrease of $27,551. Decrease is primarily attributed to professional fee expenditures due to the completion of substance abuse treatment modalities. So reduced expenditures because they've completed that project in FY 2020, which includes, and those substance abuse treatment modalities included telehealth services and peer mentoring. The decrease is partially offset by increased expenditures for computer programming services and staff travel related to that federal grant to assess the impact of that substance abuse telehealth services. Increase is attributed to updating the treatment provider payment system software. So they have a system that very efficiently manages payments to those treatment providers for the substance abuse. So they saw some increases in those expenses. Really to provide some capabilities to the Office of Judicial Administration. It allows access to them to provide some inputs into that treatment provider payment system. They are also estimated some increases in temporary staff of 15,000 would be there to address any potential backlog and data entries related to court proceedings resuming. So that's also a possible increase. Looking at capital outlay, the agency requests a revised estimate of 29,000, including 15,000 SGF for capital outlay expenditures in FY 2021. This is an all funds increase of 28,519 and an SGF increase of 15,000 above the approved amount. The increase is attributed to increased expenditures for office equipment upgrades of 10,271 that were planned for FY 2020 but shifted to FY 2021 due to the COVID pandemic. Just want to move one more item there. Other assistance, the agency requests a revised estimate of 10.5 million, all SGF for other assistance expenditures. This is that substance abuse treatment program, which comprises a large portion of their budget. This is a decrease of 42,661 below the approved amount. Expenditures in this category are payments to certified providers for substance abuse treatment of offenders in the SB 123 program. The revised estimate includes a reappropriation of 1.9 million, so 1.9 million that were unspent in FY 2020 are reappropriating and available as part of the agency's request would be available for them for expenditure. This large reappropriation is primarily the result of decreased admissions to the SB 123 program in FY 2020 due to court delays from the COVID-19 pandemic. But the agency anticipates fully utilizing these funds in FY 2021 as courts resume in normal operations, and the 2019 SB 18, so a piece of legislation passed in 2019, expanded those who would be eligible for the substance abuse treatment. However, that's not really fully implemented because in FY 2020 we had some court delays that were disrupting that. So the agency's estimating in FY 2021 they would see full implementation of that, so some growth in the population that would receive treatment. So now what is the governor's recommendation? The governor recommends expenditures of 10 million, including 9.8 million SGF in FY 2021. This is an all funds decrease of 2 million and an SGF decrease of 2.1 million below the agency's FY 2021 revised estimate. The recommendation decreases expenditures in an amount equal to the SGF monies reappropriated, so she has essentially decreased what the expenditures are based on the amount that reappropriated from the previous year. So the recommendation includes decreasing payments to treatment providers in the SB 123 substance abuse treatment program by 1.9 million, of which 920,000 is lapsed back to the state general fund, so no longer available to the agency, and 986,000 is shifted as a planned reappropriation into FY 22. So she is essentially capturing all of the funds that were reappropriated from 2020. Half of it goes back to the state general fund. The other half is made available in the next fiscal year. Further, the recommendation does not include 69,211 budgeted by the agency for the initial phase of the 2-year pay increase, and shifts the funding source of 168,000 in contractual services expenditures from the state general fund to the special revenue fund. So the agency maintains a special revenue fund that draws money from the sale of publications and research requests. And so she would, instead of paying some contractual services from the SGF, she's recommending that they pay those from the special revenue fund. The recommendation includes 13.8 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the agency's FY 2021 revised estimate. So that's a very quick run through of the FY 2021. And Mr. Chairman, I can proceed on to FY 22, or I can stop for questions. Okay. If members would please turn to page 594, we'll look at the FY 22 budget request. The agency requested 10 million, including 9.9 million SGF for FY 2022. The request is an all funds decrease of 2 million and an SGF decrease of 2.1 million below the FY 2021 revised estimate. The decrease is primarily attributed to the FY 21 SGF reappropriations of 2.1 million not occurring in FY 22. The decrease is also attributed to decreased expenditures related to the completion of a federal grant assessing the impact of substance abuse treatment in FY 2021. So in FY 21, they wrap up those grants, so that funding is not available, so their expenditures would decrease in FY 22. So this includes decreases for computer programming, staff travel, computer equipment. The decrease is partially offset by increased salaries and wages expenditures, primarily attributed to the final phase, totaling $86,659. Final phase of the agency's 2-year transition to a new pay plan. The request includes 13.8 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the FY 2021 revised estimate. I'm just going to hit a few of these categories very quickly. Salaries and wages, this is an increase of $51,912 above the FY 2021 revised estimate. Again, the increase is primarily attributed to that salary increase. Contractual services, this is an all funds decrease of $141,000 and an SGF decrease of $235,000. Below the FY 2021 revised estimate, again, the decrease is attributed to decreased expenditures for computer programming and staff travel, primarily related to the federal grant-related work completed in FY 2020. And the decrease is also attributed to the completion of the treatment provider payment software upgrades of $19,800 that were done in FY 2021, so they're done. And so they have a decreased expenditures for that purpose in FY 22. And then looking at other assistance, the agency requests $8.7 million, all SGF, for other assistance expenditures. This is a decrease of $1.9 million below the FY 2021 revised estimate. Expenditures in this category are payments to certified providers for the substance abuse treatment in the SB 123 program. The decrease is attributable to SGF reappropriations of $1.9 million in FY 2021 that do not reoccur in 22. However, what was the governor's recommendation? Governor's recommendation recommends expenditures of $10 million, including $9.8 million SGF for FY 22. This is an SGF decrease of $82,659 below the agency's FY 2022 request. The recommendation does not include $82,659 requested by the agency for the final phase of a 2-year pay increase plan. Further, the recommendation would utilize $986,490 in planned reappropriations from FY 21 for the SB 123 substance abuse treatment program. So you'll remember in FY 21, she decreased expenditures equal to the amount that was reappropriated. Half of it went back to the state general fund. Half of it was meant for a planned reappropriation. So here you're seeing the emergence of that planned reappropriation. So the funds for the substance abuse treatment program, this would allow the agency to meet their anticipated expenditures for the program of $8.6 million in FY 2022 while reducing the base appropriation by 10%. The recommendation includes 13.8 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the agency's FY 2022 request. And I will just really quickly hit on the reduced resources. So each agency, as you folks are well aware, agencies were asked to identify a 10% reduction. This agency identified a 10% reduction from the SB 123 program. Looking on page 596, the agency submits a reduced resource budget that includes a decrease of $986,460 or 10% in expenditures from the SB 123 substance abuse treatment program for FY 22. The agency states that if adopted, the reduced resource proposal would reduce payments to substance abuse treatment providers. The agency indicates that such a reduction would eliminate treatment for approximately 446 offenders and possibly result in increased prison admissions due to probation revocations. The governor recommends partial adoption of this reduced resource budget. The recommendation, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but the recommendation would reduce expenditures in that SB 123 program by $1.9 million in FY 2021. So the agency proposed to reduce this in FY 22. She's proposing to make that adjustment in FY 21. of which 986,490 is shifted for a planned reappropriation into FY22. The recommendation then reduces the FY22 base appropriation by the same amount. So she can make that reduction in FY22 because there is a planned reappropriation that makes that money available in FY22. Looking on page 597, you'll see the governor's recommended salary and wage adjustments. For FY22, just want to note the governor is proposing a 2.5% state employee pay adjustment. This agency would be included as part of that 2.5% pay increase, although that is not reflected in the budget numbers that you see in front of you. So just to note, the agency requested an 8.6% salary increase. The governor did not recommend it. The governor would include them as part of a 2.5% base salary increase. Further, longevity bonuses, this agency does not have any employees that would be eligible for the longevity bonus. Finally, the last thing I want to hit on is 598, the Sentencing Commission General Fee Fund. You can see the balances for that general fee fund. Sentencing Commission receives funds from the sale of publication, fees associated with data requests, and reimbursements from other state agencies. You can see it's not a large fund, but it does provide some resources to the agency. The only thing I would note is, as part of the governor's recommendation, if you look on that table, governor's recommendation FY 2021 expenditures, you'll see that the agency requested 11,000 expenditures. The governor is recommending 179,000. As I mentioned earlier, the governor recommended shifting the funding for some contractual services from state general fund and instead funding it out of the special revenue fund. And so you can see from the table, the fund does end with a positive balance, but in both FY21 and FY22, that does decrease the balance for that agency. And sir, the following is a breakdown by program. Much of those items I've already talked about, but I can go into more depth if you'd like, or I can stand for questions.
I think we'll just do questions. Questions for Merle? Seeing none, thank you, Merle. Next, we'll have Scott Schultz, Executive Director of the Kansas Sentencing Commission on WebEx. Welcome, Scott.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission or the committee, thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Pleasure to be here with you today, and I appreciate very much your willingness to allow me to present virtually. I'm unfortunately in closing in on week 5 of COVID recovery, and so nice to be able to still be able to work and be with you today. So now that I've hopefully garnered your sympathies, let's jump into our budget. I just wanted to say I appreciate for the 4 of you on the committee. I know at least 3 of you have had quite a few touches with public safety, but also with the Sentencing Commission over the years, and I hope the other committee member, obviously, who has prison in their district, understands the significance of being able to provide great value in terms of data to the criminal justice system. And that's exactly what our office is tasked to do by law, and that's what we've done over our history since 1993. As Merle said, and I'm sure you are very well aware, what a great analyst. We're very thankful to have him as our liaison with KLRD. He has gone the extra mile to make sure that he understands our agency, even coming over to our office to check that out, sit with us, and really understand the inner workings of our agency. So I certainly want to recognize his commitment to actually bringing you the facts as far as the numbers are concerned here today. As you know, the Sentencing Commission is a 17-member body. We have Secretary Zamuda, who you just heard, Prisoner Review Board folks, 2 legislators from the Senate, 2 from the House, and then we have Attorney General's designee, we have appellate judge, a couple district court judges, probation is represented, as well as prosecutors and defense attorneys. So the entire gambit or cross-section of the criminal justice community makes up the Sentencing Commission. And so we suggest policymaking suggestions and recommendations to the legislature every year. We track all the bills and give you bed space impacts. Those of you who have been on Senate Judiciary know that every single criminal justice bill that has implications of bed impact, our data that we have, that we maintain, goes into actually providing you with as much information as possible to determine whether or not there's a cost benefit in increasing penalties or doing whatever else with that particular bill. We are a freestanding agency. This helps us, and even though there's only 14 on staff, this allows our reports and data to be insulated from actual or even perceived bias. We are designated as the Statistical Analysis Center for the state of Kansas, and that allows us to cooperate and receive criminal justice data from all sorts of other public safety entities. Director Thompson we have a MOU with KBI. We get arrest and misdemeanor data from them dating back to 1912. We have KDOC databases that we have access to, as well as maintaining our own databases for felony crimes. And so with that, that gives us a very rich source of information to bring. And the data is what the data is. And that's something that is very beneficial for all of our stakeholders. And I'll kind of touch on them in a little bit, but one of the main items, and I think this was brought up yesterday during KDOC's when Merle was presenting, was a question about prison population, and that's projections is what we do. In July, DOC gives us all of their data, and we have 6 weeks to turn that around. I want to share with you, and I'll share my screen here for you, just to kind of give you an idea of what that is looking like, and I hope you can see that all right. What you see here is what the actual population was up until essentially COVID hit, and then we had a significant decrease in population of almost 1,000. And then in looking at where we go from here, what we actually do is give them a 10-year projection. And what this does is it allows us to them to plan for potential builds. It also helps us helps them in determining what kind of request they're going to have to make to the legislature too. So with that projection, it obviously was very difficult. It was an unanticipated situation as far as the pandemic was concerned, but the decrease has provided for what we believe are some opportunities in as far as sentencing reform is concerned. And so that's the other side of the coin that the commission is not only operating in the capacity of providing the data, but also providing recommendations to make sure that we don't have the continued capacity issues that we have struggled with for many, many years prior to the pandemic. So I'll just get back out of that. Some of the other things, as many of you are aware, prison projections are but one of those things. Legislated by the state's bed space impacts. This is one of our busiest times during the session because we cover all of the criminal justice bills that are going through right now. We do those bed impacts. We provide educational resources for all of those stakeholders, whether it be judges, attorneys, all the practitioners in the criminal justice system, probation officers that are and provide resources for them. Webinars. I have a special projects director that is her sole job, is to provide educational outreach. So I know you have quite a few things, other things to do today. So I just wanted to touch on some of the things that Merle talked about, the SB 123 program. It is for possession-only offenders, if you recall. 90, almost 90% of our budget is Senate Bill 123, and that is a pass-through entity. So essentially, those funds are passing through our agency based upon the use, and we don't control that. It depends on how much the court is sentencing those folks. Whoever, if they meet criteria, are assessed accordingly by statute. They can be placed into this program and supervised by community corrections. We then coordinate the substance abuse treatment for these offenders and then pay the treatment providers, many of which are in your districts. So that obviously, with the pandemic, with the shelter-in-place orders, many of the treatment providers, many of the probation offices actually closed, and so they couldn't see offenders. The admissions also to the program slowed down, and so we are having, as Merle indicated, savings because we just didn't have that many people in the program. The main takeaway as far as the Senate Bill 123 program, and it has always been a good program since, I think we're in our 18th year now, since 2003. And that is that community programming for this type of treatment is always better than in an incarcerated setting. Secretary Zamuda indicated to you that despite best efforts, about 48% of the people that need substance abuse treatment in prison get it. What I can tell you is the folks that are on Senate Bill 123, 100% of those folks on community corrections get substance abuse treatment. So, and we're providing that at $3,535 per year, not $80 a day or almost $30,000. So it's a great value for the tax dollar, and it also works. We had a study that was done several years ago on the program that found the offenders in the program were 25 to 30% less likely to recidivate than non-SB 123 offenders. They had a lower rate of reconviction, and those that completed the program were 75% less likely to reoffend with a new conviction. So that that last one is fantastic. You don't get that very often in a criminal justice program. So as it relates to that, and for your purposes, we don't have any problems with the governor's recommendation as far as 21, and for that matter in 22 as it relates to Senate Bill 123. What we do have concerns with is the request as far as the salaries are concerned. And I know that DOC has come before you. KBI with their lab folks is always an issue as far as competition and losing folks. Bids comes in and does the same ask for you as well. What I would tell you is we have data scientists in particular that this is a niche situation, and it is a highly sought after situation in the private sector. An individual coming out right now out of just a bachelor's degree can make $50,000 coming out with no experience whatsoever. I have an analyst that has a master's in criminology, a law degree, and is working on his PhD, and he is making that same amount and has been with us for 2 years. So to further complicate things, we essentially have 3 researchers that do the work to make this happen. We have data entry folks that actually pull in all the data, enter it into the database, and then these 3 folks actually are involved in the business of doing the analysis. This is something that it takes training. As I said, we have multiple databases that we're handling from KBI, DOC, and our own databases. And so it takes a while to train on it. understand it, and then understand the sentencing guidelines to boot. I lost a seasoned analyst to Department of Justice earlier on last year. We have not been able to fill the position since April because the salary is so low. To exacerbate things further, my director of research of 25 years, who actually built our computer model, he is retiring at the end of March. So we will be down to one individual to do the work of three. And so I liken it to a situation where you're used to having direct TV. We'll be down to 1980 when we had 3 channels. And I think all of you can probably remember that. We have, again, it requires special expertise. The commission recognized this early on, and so they asked for a salary survey to be done. A third party came in and did that, and this was the recommendation as far as asking for the 69,000 in 21 and the 82,000 in, and that was to bring us up to market, to be able to be competitive, to be able to retain staff and be able to recruit staff. What I would say in closing on this particular issue is that, again, if we do not have, this is a fundamental piece, this is a mission critical piece of of what we do in our business. And if we do not have the ability to do the research, you do not have the legislative bed space impacts. You do not have the quality of prison population projections that you've come to expect, that the governor's come to expect, that all of our partners that we work with have come to expect. And so that's why I'm fearful of if we do not get this particular request, that we're going to be in trouble. And then that puts pressure on the only individual researcher left to try and avoid burnout. So what I would like to do again is share with you, if I can share my screen here, is just a reflection of where, and this is my attachment in my testimony as well, just to give you an idea of where we fell as far as prison population is concerned. But this also gives you an idea of where the commission had projected those populations over the past years prior to COVID, and how accurate this is. The table itself kind of brings that into focus in terms of looking at the last 10 years, where we were within 1.5% error of actually, you're talking almost 10,000 prison beds between the male and female population. When we're only 144 off, that means the computer model is extremely well done and is working very well. If you take the COVID situation off from the 10.3, if you take that off and we look at it from last year, our accuracy was 0.3%. Again, your ROI on this is that these precise metrics save the state millions of dollars because we don't have to build. We don't have to tell DOC you're going to have to build prisons for later on. So again, one of the things that we talked about was in House Transportation and Public Safety this last week as well, was that based upon the timing of this and the fact that you will probably not pass a budget till April or May or so, that first request as far as 21, we could probably, if you were willing, we could be willing to forego that and just look at a 22 appropriation, or at least a consideration at omnibus for that $82,659. That would at least help us be able to put that in place, and would help us be able to recruit folks. We do have House Bill 2026 has also passed through, which is a diversion bill to expand 123. That is a fiscal impact of $250,000, and House Transportation also put that on as well with theirs. That is something that it passed out of the House 123 to nothing, and we had a hearing in Senate Judiciary on it just this past week, and there were not any opponents on it. Prosecutors, everybody is pretty much supporting expanding 123 treatment to folks that would be on diversion. So with that, I've included some other items in the testimony as far as coronavirus relief funding and those type of things. But clearly, the mission critical issue that we are facing at this point, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, is this ability to hire. With that, I appreciate. I thought I saw Director Thompson. I think he may have an extra $1 million or something in his budget. I'm not sure, but he might. If there is a possibility, we would certainly respectfully make that request for that salary situation.
Thank you, Scott. Is Melissa, did she want to testify, or was she just there in case we had questions for the financial manager?
Mr. Chair, she is available in case we had some questions, but she is not anticipating to testify unless you have some detailed questions.
No, that's why I just wanted to make sure I had her down here. Are there any questions for Scott or Melissa? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This really isn't a question, Scott. It's good to see you. I'm glad that you're in recovery, and sorry to hear that you've had such a long bout with COVID, and actually miss seeing your face here in the Capitol, and definitely the information that comes from the Sentencing Commission is always pertinent to making our decisions for populations. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Scott and Melissa. I guess we have Stuart Little, the lobbyist. Was you wanting to testify, Stuart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I was outside listening and trying to get closed up and come in here. Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment. I'm appearing today on behalf of the Behavioral Health Association of Kansas, who provide substance abuse treatment services for the Senate Bill 123 program. And that's what you want, a sentencing commission, correct? Okay, so the issue is there are a variety of bills, at least 4 in the House and 1 that's coming through the Senate, that are going to add offenders to the Senate Bill 123 program if they are passed. I'm not asking you to do anything specific right now, other than include in your subcommittee report that will go to the full committee, that if any of that legislation that adds offenders to the treatment program, on behalf of the folks that are providing those services, there needs to be additional resources that are placed in these programs so that it can serve the additional offenders, or if they're part of a diversion program that's going on. So we just want to make sure that gets flagged when you guys sit down at Omnibus. If any of those bills have passed, that's a conversation that you all would engage in as to whether there were resources, so that we could make sure that if we're going to send people to that program that is effective and everyone likes, that there are resources to fund it. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions for Stuart? No, thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it, and I think we'll put a note in there. Okay, with that, our hearing is closed on the Sentencing Commission, and I'd like to just go ahead and deliberate this while we're here too. I think it's been noted about the salaries, how important they are for this agency, and we'll look at them on the global basis just like we are the rest of them. However, I do think we need to make a notation that they're only needing $86,659 in order to fulfill their mission. And I would also like for us to put a notation in there that we do look at any bills that might pass at Omnibus. Anything else, Senator Petty?
No, I'm just wondering if that might pass that increase as Stuart said, that increase the number of offenders that would add offenders to the program. So it's legislation that would add vendors to the program.
Right. Any bills that will impact this sentencing.
SB 123. It'd be
Yes.
specific to SB 123.
123, yes.
And on the salary enhancement, if we're looking at this omnibus, would specific to the 22 budget?
Yes, unless the committee wanted to do something even in 21. I think
I mean, the
I'll leave that
testimony
open.
But from,
He said that 22, they needed the 86,000, so
yeah, the 22 budget.
the note I put, so
Right.
I think if everyone's okay with that, we'll just put it for the 22, the 86,000.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so I just want to clarify that is a review at omnibus, potentially adding 82,000 for FY '22. And then I'm also tracking a review at omnibus, any bills that might impact the SB 123 program. And you want me to kind of keep that focused on the SB 123 program?
Correct, yep, it would impact our budget.
I got it, sir.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Senator Petty?
I just want to bring up something once we close this.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close this hearing. Before we move on, Senator Petty?
Thank you. I would like to add one item to the Department of Corrections that I kind of overlooked when we were going over that, and that would be for at Omnibus to look at the impact that the recommendations in the governor's budget has on the Juvenile Evidence-Based Practice Fund.
Does anyone have any objection to that? No? Okay.
Thank you.
We'll add that.
Could I just clarify one thing?
Yes,
So
Merle?
right now, the recommendation is built that those funds would be lapsed. So if that appropriation is approved, those funds will go away. And I just want to clarify, Senator Petty, you're talking about reconsidering that matter got it, okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next item we have is the Adjutant General, and we have Aaron Clausen with KLRD for the overview. Aaron, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right. You should have the budget analysis for the Adjutant General's Department before you. On page 418, you'll note that the Adjutant General Department provides for the organization readiness training of the Kansas Air and Army National Guard and an implementation of statewide emergency management programs and homeland security for Kansas. As most of these front pages are summarial in nature, and we've seen this in past budgets, I'll move right into the meat of the budget on page 428. On page 428, you'll see the 2020 Legislature approved a state general fund budget of $10.8 million. There have been a few adjustments to this, which includes the increase of $4.5 million for reappropriation of 2020 funding that moved into 2021, an increase of $11.8 million based on the reimbursement of SGF expenditures and coronavirus-related reimbursed, and a decrease of $1.5 million as a result of the governor's July 1st SGF allotment. You'll see here at the bottom that the SGF amount is now changed to $25.6 million. The agency requests 21 revised estimate, including $86.8 million, including $9.7 for the State General Fund for operations and capital improvements. The 21 revised estimate is an all funds increase of 1.1 or 1.2%, and an SGF decrease of $16 million or 62.2% below the 21 approved amount. The agency's revised estimate includes two supplemental requests totaling $763,142, including $381,571 SGF for deferred maintenance or rehab repair in 21. The revised estimate includes 288 FTE positions, an increase of 7 positions, which the agency breaks down for you. It is due to the addition of 2 positions for COVID response, 3 FTE positions for information technology positions, and then 2 positions for grounds maintenance and technicians at the 190th Airfielding Wing in Forbes Field in Topeka. The increase in expenditures is primarily related to COVID-19 related emergency expenditures and the adjustments of other disaster payments. SGF transfer from the State Emergency Fund becomes special revenue funds expenditures and are accounted as such in the agency's budget. I will note on the bottom of page 429, there's a breakdown by those categories of expenditure. And then if we're on page 430, you'll see the governor recommends 21 expenditures totaling $133.2 million, including $11.5 from the State General Fund for operations and capital improvements. The 21 recommendation is an all funds increase of 46.4 million or 53.4% and an SGF increase of $1.8 million or 18.7% above the agency's 21 revised estimate. The governor's recommendation includes the following adjustments: not recommending the agency supplemental requests, reducing SGF expenditures or replacing them with special revenue funds or existing revenue fund balances, reducing incident management team SGF expenditures, replacing state general fund with disaster grant public assistance federal funds. My understanding is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, some positions are allowed to be funded through federal funding. Accounting for COVID-19 funding rounds for the State Finance Council, which includes about $24.7 million, all from special revenue funds, and then recommending an addition of SGF specifically for deferred maintenance at the governor's recommendation of $463,696, including $231,848 from the State General Fund. On the bottom of page 430, you'll see the breakdown by chart, but also the extra detail continuing on to page 431 of deferred maintenance as well as rehab and repair. My understanding that the governor recommends a total of $463,696, as I noted before, and SGF for deferred maintenance particularly. I will note that these requests are based upon a consultant's understanding of the disparity between the National Guard bureaus requirements for facilities and the Adjutant General's review of their current facilities. You'll note at the bottom of page 431, we have a breakdown of the governor's allotments. Allotments in this budget total $1.5 million, and they're broken down by deferred maintenance, rehab and repair, and Capers D&D moratorium. These are amounts essentially that were approved by the 2020 legislature, and this allotment reduces those amounts. On the bottom of page 432, if you're ready for fiscal year 2022.
Darren, go ahead and do 22, and then we'll do questions.
Okay, on the bottom of 432, you'll have the agency requesting operating budget of $51.4 million, including $7 million from the State General Fund, which is a decrease of $26 million or 33.6 million or 33.6%, and an SGF decrease of $992,362 or 2.7% below the 21 revised estimate. The primary decrease is due to significant expenditures on personal protective equipment in 21 revised estimate, which do not reoccur for fiscal year 2022. The request includes 288.0 FTE positions, no change from the 21 revised estimate. You'll see on page 433 that I've broken down by major category of expenditure. And at the bottom of 433, you'll see the governor recommends 2022 operating expenditures totaling $51.2 million, including $6.8 million from the State General Fund. The 2022 recommendation is an all funds decrease of $148.43, or 0.3%, an SGF decrease of $218,699 or 3.1% below the agency's 2022 request. The governor's recommendation includes the following adjustments: the deletion of $40,000 from the SGF to reduce expenditures for the State Active Duty Civic Program, the deletion of expenditures of $77,856 from SGF for the same, and then addition of the same amount from the Military Fee Fund. And the addition of $1.6 million all from the SGF for design costs to remodel the State Defense Building where the Kansas Division of Emergency Management and the State Emergency Operations Center are located. I've broken down the enhancement requests on the bottom of page 434 for you. The agency had requested money for a Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center analyst, which the governor did not recommend. Had requested money for deferred maintenance, which the governor did not recommend. Had requested money for rehab and repair, which the governor recommended at $1 million, including $500,000 from the State General Fund. And then for the State Defense Building redesign and remodel on page 435, you'll see that the agency came up with 3 separate options for this particular request and requested rather, that the complete remodel of the facility is currently determined to be the best agency option. The governor does recommend $1.6 million off the SGF for the design costs to remodel the State Defense Building in support of KDEM and the SCOC. You'll notice on the bottom of page 435, the reduced resources package that the agency has requested to submit are down there for you. This includes on page 436, reduction of $40,000 all for the SGF for the State Active Duty Program, and the lapsing of SGF balances that are existing within the funds, which includes incident management team reduction of $145,256, the lapsing of $550,000 from the State General Fund. The governor does recommend the State Active Duty Program Civic Management reduction, and then makes the different adjustments that were included in the 2022 recommendation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will let you stand for 2022 questions, but I'll let you know that there's still yet the capital improvements portion to go over.
Thank you, Aaron. Are there questions for Aaron? Seeing none, we'll move on. Major General David Wessar.
Actually, if I might, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Aaron.
just going to note real quickly on page 455 is the capital improvements section of the agency budget analysis. I'm just to let you know that the Joint Committee on State Building Construction did concur with the 2021 and 2022 requests. They're on page 455. I've broken down for you the agency requested in 2021, 9.5 million, including 2.5 million to the state general fund, which includes 160,000 for debt service interest or principal payments on expenditures on Army renovation bonds, as well as 514,719 for rehab and repair and deferred maintenance, which we talked about earlier. And the expenditures do include 1.5 million in reappropriated life, health, and safety projects, which were for fire suppression systems and Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. You'll see that on page 456, I've broken down the projects for you. I'll note that the governor recommends expenditures totaling 9.2 million, including 2.3 from the state general fund for capital improvements in 21. That's broken down there for you. Then 2022, the agency requests totaling 31.8, including 24.0 million from SGF for 2022. The request includes 3 enhancements totaling 25.7 and 23.3 from the state general fund. For the design and remodel of the state defense building, state general fund includes 170,000 for debt service principal, rehab and repair expenditures, deferred maintenance, and then as the redesign and remodel of the state defense building. You'll see that the governor's recommendation, I've broken them down further for you on page 457, but the governor recommends on page 458 expenditures totaling 8.7 million, including 2.8 million for this SGF for capital improvements in 2022. All funds decreased to 23.1 million, including, which is basically 72.5%, including a decrease of 21.2 from the SGF, or 88.4% below the agency's 2022 request. The decrease is due to the governor not recommending the agency's enhancement request for deferred maintenance, and then only recommending design expenditures of the remodel of the state defense building at 1.6, and then the governor's inclusion of rehab and repair funding. I will let you know, Mr. Chairman, that Michael Neth of the Adjunct General's Department, the state comptroller, is available for questions and their presentation.
Questions for Aaron? Okay, we're going to move on then to the Major General David Wessar. Major General, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Major General David Wessar. I'm your Adjutant General. If you can see me or hear me.
We can see you and hear you both.
Okay, great. Sorry that you can see me. I'm glad you can hear me. So I'm going to share my screen here so we can run through some slides real quick. Okay, I think we're up there. I think you can see my slides.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go to the next slide here. So this is just a quick mission statement for us. To summarize all those words up there, the Adjutant General's Department is really all about protecting life and property through the coordination and synchronization of military, Kansas Division of Emergency Management, and Homeland Security capabilities. I'll jump right into some of the numbers here. So our FY20 budget, these are the actuals. You'll see on the slide here, and then my subsequent slide, I'll show you a pie chart so you can, it's just easier to dissect and decipher. Most of our money comes from federal budget. You see our $6 million there, or $6 million base budget is a pretty small amount of what we get overall. But most of our federal budget monies come as a direct result of state matching funds. So that's why it's important that we get the state budget correct. One exception on our slide there that is 100% state funded is our Civil Air Patrol. Their operating budget is 100% state funded, and that's a very small part of what the Civil Air Patrol does for us is that $41,000. As you can see at the bottom of the slide there, we had some significant disaster relief money and COVID relief money this year. So that's really an anomaly that it's that high. But again, it was all due to COVID. So this slide is what I talked about. You see the pretty colors there to indicate what is federal funding and what is state funding. So this is about a 180 out of, I saw the Department of Corrections this morning, where the big piece of the pie is federal funds as opposed to state funds. The very small piece of the pie there is our state fund. We spend more dollars on our 100% federally funded buildings because we don't typically have the state general fund to spend on the split funded buildings. So I'll talk a little bit more about buildings here later on as well. So the next slide here is just some of the open disasters we're still monitoring. So you see on the slide, we're still monitoring damages back to 2016. So right now, state's matching portion of FEMA funds is about $25 million. I say about because that last line there, the COVID-19 response, today's estimate is about $15 million. However, FEMA continues to change their mind on how much they're going to fund us, if it's going to be 100% funding, if it's going to be the standard 75-25 match. So that's why I say it's an about amount there. Just to give you an update on where we spent the money we've allocated this in the past. We asked for 2 full-time positions for our Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center. Those personnel are hired. We needed $40,000 for securing some of our facilities across the state. That was really our recruiting facilities. If you remember back a few years ago, there was some recruiting facilities across the nation that were attacked. And our stations were also very vulnerable. So we asked for some additional monies, and we have put that into those facilities. You can see on the slide there, we purchased CCTV systems, intercom systems, some blast retention films. We have a weapon and ammunition in each one of those facilities, a safe to put those weapons in. And yes, we have trained the individuals that reside in those facilities on how to use that weapon should they need to. Some of the other monies that you see up there is we've asked for rehab and repair in the past and deferred maintenance. We got those monies and we applied them to those armories. And just as a side note, we've got 38 armories across the state. So the dollars we spend on armories are much needed. And we have a lot of buildings to try to maintain with a very small amount of budget or small amount of money. See there, the last bullet, the COVID-19 relief. Initially, we asked for $15 million and received that last March from Legislature. Well, as this has progressed, we've been able to basically reimburse most of that through FEMA or with FEMA money. They allowed us to reimburse it, and I'll get into the actual dollars here in I think 2 slides. Then in April, we asked for an additional $10 million, which was approved by State Finance Council because at that time, FEMA had not allowed us to receive any monies for this public health emergency. So we went through a lot of money, but again, we appropriated that money, but most of that you'll see in the subsequent slides here that we provided that back to the state via federal money. Next slide, for anybody of you that's been on the committee in the past or anybody that's new, we've had some large federal dollars come in for some new facilities. 2 new facilities we've got are at Fort Leavenworth. We've got a National Guard barracks and a National Guard right in the center. And you see how much money we spent on those. We're hoping to have those open at the end of 2020, but COVID slowed down a little bit of the construction progress. So we're hoping now early spring we'll have those open. We'll have a ribbon cutting ceremony. Great event for us and some great facilities for us. So the governor's recommendations and what we asked for your support in FY22 is $500,000 in state general funds for deferred maintenance and rehab and repair in our facilities. So I will be able to match that with $500,000 in federal funds. So that gives us $1 million. And remember, 38 armories across the state, $1 million doesn't go far trying to maintain buildings that were built in the 50s. And our state defense building remodel. I think Aaron talked about that a bit. The governor's recommended we add $1.6 million in state general funds this year for the design. So what we found during the COVID response is the state defense building is great for a bomb shelter, It's not so great for a pandemic response where you have to try to socially distance and keep people separated. So what we had to do through this response was actually telework a bunch of people that we would normally have inside the facility, helping us make decisions. During a response to this magnitude, we pull in all kinds of emergency support function partners. So our population base grows about threefold when there's a disaster going on. So we normally have round numbers of 20 people working in the building. We can have upwards of 60 to 75 people working in there during a response action. We simply couldn't do that this time. So that makes it challenging. It's not optimal to try to make decisions when you don't have all parties at the table. It just works better when you can have face-to-face communications, even though video teleconferencing works, but again, it's not optimal. Talk a little bit about coronavirus relief funds and where we spent some of our money. We had 5 different funding sources this year for coronavirus relief. And I'll go into each one of those here separately. So the first Coronavirus Relief Act fund was in state fiscal year 20. So if you remember back, I talked about the $15 million we got from y'all. Of that $15 million, we were able to reimburse $13.4 million of that through the CARES Act funding. And just give me an idea of where some of that money went. You see up on that slide that the bulk of it went for personal protection. $11.2 million was the PPE purchase that we have continued to make, but since last March, we've been purchasing PPE. Our State Emergency Operations Center operating expenses, about $600,000. Non-congregate sheltering, $1 million. Bulk food packaging and distribution, about $700,000. And you'll see more of that carried over into the state fiscal year 21. Some of the same expenses, but we're able to split fiscal years and some of our CARES Act funding. So this slide is the CARES Act funding for state fiscal year 21. So we received about $28.5 million from the SPARC Task Force and Recovery Office for our response actions. And I can run down some of the big expenses that we had. So $1.25 million we sent out to rural county emergency operations centers to enhance their facilities. They too have centers just like we do at the State Emergency Operations Center. Works great, except during your pandemic response. So some of the counties need to enhance their operation centers in order to be more effective. So again, they applied for and received $1.25 million. The next one, 1.6 out to our business personal protective equipment program. And that was really all about businesses that could not get PPE. So we had much better buying power and leverage as a large entity. So we were able to buy PPE and get them out to the businesses so they could continue operating. So I talked about PPE. So if you're doing the math here real quick, there's round numbers of $15 million worth of PPE that we have purchased. So where are we going to warehouse that? Well, so $1.2 million to lease warehouse equipment and staffing to start managing that PPE. So up until this point, up until the pandemic, there was a state stockpile that was stored in a facility in the Kansas City area. I talked about this during the KEMA conference, KEMA review, just to give you guys some more information and back brief on that information. We had PPE that was stored in the state stockpile that was 10 years old. So we distributed this PPE out and well, guess what? It was no good anymore. The elastic was gone and some of the masks simply fell apart. So spending this $1.2 million on warehousing the equipment really is getting us ahead of or up to where we should be as far as managing supplies. It's basically the supply principles of first in, first out. So that's what this warehousing is helping us do. We purchased ventilators to tune of $2.5 million to distribute across the state. When this started, ventilators were in high demand. We were able to get 150 ventilators very, very early in the pandemic response. We've got those distributed across the state, and we've got an additional 150 that we purchased, and we have them on standby. We have some sitting here in the state warehouse, and we have some distributed across the state, sitting in some of our local health departments, and some of out in our regional coordinator offices. And I just finished a call with the state leadership and elected officials that we do on a bi-weekly basis, so I had the opportunity to brief on that. So ventilators, to get those out across the state, we partnered with the Kansas Highway Patrol, partnered with Civil Air Patrol to get those delivered for us. And if for some reason Highway Patrol can deliver those faster than I can, may have to talk to Colonel Jones' company and see how they can do that. State match, $8.6 million. because there has to be a state match. So we've spent some of the CARES Act money, and normally FEMA does not allow you to use FEMA money to use as a state match. Fortunately, FEMA has allowed us to do that this time. So there's a lot of differences happening through this response that has not happened before. On behalf of KDHE, you'll see two line items there, the 11.8 million and the 1.3 million. We purchased those things on behalf of KDHE because we could do it rapidly. So 11.8 million went out to the local health departments and some of the things that they needed to help through this pandemic response. And then the health surge platform, that's really about patient management. Again, that was purchased on behalf of KDHE. And then the second to last bullet there, the 241,000, the State Emergency Operations Center was audio video upgrades. And that was simply due to having to telework. We still had to continue to communicate with all 105 counties, as well as some of our staff. We simply did not have the audio visual system set up to do that. So we had to spend some money in order to make that happen. And here's the other three types of funding that we have for this thing. Again, talked about the State Finance Council, Emergency Management Performance Grant Supplemental. And you'll see that one specifically requires a 50-50 match. And our disaster relief funds. And this one, I try to be vague about talking about this one simply because it is an accounting nightmare, because it seems that every day we have a change from FEMA on how we're supposed to manage this. So we've got a smart accountant and his staff on board. You heard his name already, Michael Meth. He's doing a great job of managing these funds for us. But there's a lot of strange isms that are going on with the response effort. And again, it changes every day. So that's the best information I can provide you today. With that, I will stand open for any discussions you may have, or any questions you may have.
Thank you, David. Questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wanting, you mentioned 38 facilities around. Do you lease them or do you own them?
Yes, this is the short answer. The longer answer is the bulk of them are state-owned facilities. We do lease a few of them, but the bulk of them are state-owned facilities.
Okay. How do you decide? I got one more question, sorry.
Go ahead, Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 7,000. How do you decide on the size of your force? Is that 7,000 been growing or smaller, or how does that compare? How do you decide that kind of number around that you need?
So we don't decide that locally. That's decided at the federal department.
Federal level?
Yep. Okay. So they tell us what kind of mission sets that they need in the state of Kansas. And we're normally good soldiers and airmen and salute smartly, say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and make it happen. So historically, we've had larger numbers. But as the entire Department of Defense draws down the total numbers, we have subsequently received cuts in the state as well. So 7,000 is set at the national level, and it is our job to recruit to those 7,000 positions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Major General. Appreciate your input today.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Committee, I think we might as well deliberate this one too while we're here. Are there any suggestions on the budget for the Adjutant General's Department? Senator Petty?
So, suggest that we accept the governor's recommendation for 21 and 22.
And there was no pay raises in this one, so we don't have to worry about global or anything. So is everyone okay with that? Senator Fagg, okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We had a motion by Senator Petty and we had a second by Senator Fagg. I should have mentioned that. Okay, next one we have is the Highway Patrol, and we'll have the overview by Aaron Clausen, KLRD.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll let you know that the Highway Patrol is here available today, and you'll see Superintendent Jones is available on WebEx. You should have the Highway Patrol's budget analysis before you on page 545. Just note quickly that the mission of the Highway Patrol is to provide protection of life and property through the enforcement of traffic, criminal, and other laws of Kansas, and support of Homeland Security initiatives. As I've noted in previous budgets, there are summary documents here in the first few pages, but we'll move right on to page 554. On page 554, the 2021, you'll note that the agency, their request as well as their budgeting does not include any state general fund expenditures for 2021. The agency requests a revised estimate for total agency expenditures of $120.8 million, all from special revenue funds. It's an increase of $26.8 million or 28.6% above the 21 approved amount. The 2021 revised estimate includes 880 FTE positions, no change from the approved amount. The 21 revised estimate is composed of $117.7 million of operating expenditures and $3.2 million of capital improvement expenditures. The increase above the 2020 approved amount includes $25.6 million from operating expenditures and $1.2 million from capital improvements. Primary increases do include the agency's 3 supplemental requests totaling $18.5 million and the agency's additional request for capital improvement projects above the 21 approved budget. You'll see down here, I have broken down by object of expenditure the agency's request. Continuing on to page 555, the governor recommends operating expenditures totaling $121 million, all from the special revenue funds in 21. It's all funds increase of $157,788 or 0.1% above the agency's 21 revised estimate. This increase is due to the accounting for expenditures of coronavirus relief fund monies awarded and not recommending the agency's replacement an increase of the current transfer from the fleet fund to support aircraft in 2021. Essentially, this is the part of the agency supplemental requests. The agency has an annual transfer of $600,000 from the motor vehicle fleet fund to support aircraft during the year. The agency was requesting that transfer be done away with and additional support be provided from the Kansas Highway Patrol Operations Fund, which is a transfer from the State Highway Fund. The governor recommends adoption of the agency supplemental request for law enforcement aircraft replacement, the career progression plan, and enhancement of the motor carrier inspection program. The governor recommends an increase of $17.9 million to the existing transfer from the State Highway Fund to the Highway Patrol Operations Fund to support these recommended enhancements, which begin on page 555 towards the bottom. You'll see them noted in the chart. We continue in the detail on page 556. So the agency requests a total of $18.5 million in special revenue funds for these 3. The first one is the law enforcement asset replacement, for which the agency is requesting $16.1 million, all from the KHP Operations Fund. Once again, that's a transfer from the Highway Fund, for the purchase of 2 new helicopters of $11.4 million at about $5.7 million per helicopter, 1 multi-purpose single-engine airplane for $5 million, and the upgrade of FLIR, which is forward-looking infrared radar, on the 2012 Cessna 206 for $700,000. So this also takes into account the agency's plan to trade in some aircraft for about a credit of $1 million. But also included as part of the supplemental request is, as I had noted before, the agency would like to start providing for the support of these aircraft at $1.3 million annually by the KHP Operations Fund. And currently the transfer is $600,000 for the KHP Motor Vehicle Fund, which the agency would like to do away with and leave that to the support of the motor vehicle fleet. I've noted in the middle of page 556 the current breakdown of aircraft owned by the agency and the FLIR status of each of those aircraft. So the governor basically concurs with the supplemental request for law enforcement aircraft, but once again does not support the additional transfer or change of current funding for the support of the aircraft from the fleet fund for 21. At the bottom of page 556, you'll see the agency is also requesting career progression plan increase. The agency requests $1.2 million, all for the KHP Operations Fund, for an additional 2.5% pay increase for KHP Trooper Law Enforcement Officer career positions for 2021. If you'll continue on to page 557, the governor does concur with the supplemental request, with that supplemental request in 2021. One other item is the additional funding for the motor carrier inspection program. The agency requests $696,652, all from the KHP Operations Fund, to provide additional funding towards the 2021 budget agreement for the motor carrier inspection program. Basically, it was underfunded, and this is an agreement between the Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. And due to the timing of when the budget is submitted to the state and when this agreement takes place, basically the contract is, according to the agency, was underfunded, and the governor does concur with that supplemental request for 2021. I will stand for questions, or if you'd like to move on to 2022, let me know, Mr. Chairman.
Petty.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Aaron, I just want to see if I understand this. On the issue of the law enforcement asset replacement, the governor does not recommend the agency request to replace the current aircraft support transfer, but she does support the transfer, she is supporting the funding, but keeping it where it's at, that $630,493. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, you are correct. She does support the replacement of the aircraft, but not the change to the funding source to support the aircraft.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Aaron, go to 22, please.
All right, on 557, you'll see the 2022 request. The agency is requesting an operating budget of $101.1 million, all from special revenue funds, which is a decrease of 16.6 or 14.1% below the 21 estimate. The decrease primarily reflects the agency's 21 supplemental funding request for the replacement of law enforcement aircraft that is not repeated in fiscal year 2022. I've broken down by major category expenditure. Continuing on to page 558, the governor does recommend operating expenditures totaling $100.4 million, all from special revenue funds for 2022. This is an all funds decrease of $630,493 or 0.6% below the agency's 2022 request, and the decrease is due to the governor recommending that less funding, essentially for aircraft support, because the agency has requested additional. The governor does not recommend that. The breakdown of the enhancements for 2022 are included on the bottom of page 558. The agency is requesting $3.4 million. The career progression plan includes $2.1 million, all from the KHP Operations Fund for additional 2.5% increase to the KHP Trooper Law Enforcement Career Progression Plan. And then if you look on page 559, the governor does recommend that enhancement. The agency also requested funding for aircraft operations support, which the governor did not recommend for 2022 as well. And the additional funding for the motor carrier inspection program due to the submission and the timing of that, which the total is $696,652 in 2022. The governor does recommend that enhancement. If you're ready, Mr. Chairman, just on page 561, you will see a breakdown of the funding sources that the agency receives. You'll note that a primary portion of that comes from the KHP Operations Fund, which is the transfer from the State Highway Fund. We've broken down for you the KHP Staffing and Training Fund, which was provided by the 2016 Legislature, $2 non-refundable surcharge on vehicle registration fees. You'll see the decreasing balance in that fund. And you'll see a breakdown on page 563 of the FTE positions that the agency has from 2020 into the 2022 governor's recommendation. You'll also note on the following pages there is a breakdown by the programs that the agency has. But if you're willing, Mr. Chairman, we'll move on to the capital improvements section of this budget analysis, which are included on page 581.
Petty has a question.
Sure.
Aaron, before you move on, this, under the enhancement details that you shared on 558 and 559, this budget does include the 2.5% pay increase?
You are correct, Senator.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Please proceed.
All right, on page 581, you'll see the capital improvements request by the agency. I'll note to you the Joint Committee on State Building Construction did concur with the 2021 request as well as the 2022 at the governor's recommendation. The agency is estimating capital improvements in 21 to $3.2 million. The amount includes $982,122 for rehab and repair and $201,600 for scale replacement and repair, and then $2 million for new construction. I've broken down by fleet, or by troop, each of these projects as they've been notated. Remind you that Troop J is actually the training academy in Salina. And then on the top of page 583, you'll see that the governor does concur with the agency's request for 2021 capital improvements. Continuing on that page, for fiscal year 2022, capital improvements expenditures request totals $1.9 million, all from special revenue funds, which includes the $1.3 million for rehab and repair, $206,400 for scale replacement and repair, and $400,000 for new construction, which I've broken down for you on the bottom of page 583 and onto page 584. You'll see on 584 as well, the governor does concur with the agency's 2022 request for capital improvement expenditures. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions before we move on to the KHP, and Superintendent Jones is available.
Questions? Seeing none, we'll move on then to Colonel Herman Jones, Superintendent. You may be muted. We don't hear you.
About now. Okay. So sorry about that echo there. Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the patrol and the proposals that we've made here. I'm here flanked with our CFO, Sherry Mackey, and also our Air Command Commander, Jason Vanderwide, to discuss the matter here. We understand that we've got the proposal for you. We concur with what the governor has placed before you there, and specifically to the issues there of the supplements there. And at that point, Sherry Mackey will go into more detail on that matter. So,
good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sherry Mackey. I'm the CFO for the Kansas Highway Patrol, and I appreciate the opportunity to share an overview of the agency's budget with you today. We are going to attempt to bring up the presentation on the screen to share for those who may not have it, and if we're not successful, we may recommend Aaron helping us out. All right, looks like you have a copy of the presentation there. So starting on page 2, I believe everybody has a copy of the presentation deck. This is a budget request summary, and what I provided for you is the 2020 actual, a little different than what Aaron presented, compared to our agency 2021 adjusted budget request. You'll see it broken down by expense category, salaries, contractual services, so on. You will also find a column that shows the dollar variance of our 2020 actual versus 21 adjusted. In the same realm, you'll see a percent variance comparing the same, and then it goes into the 2022. More specifically to the 2020 actual versus 2021 adjusted, you'll see the variances right a little over 22 million. That'll lead us into the second slide. So on slide 3, you'll see the budget variances, fiscal year 2020 actual versus the 21 adjusted budget. Again, the net budget increase is 22 million, and this is all revenue sources. Our primary revenue source is the highway fund. We also have various fee funds that we utilize for revenues and paying for expenditures. Some of the key variances there, I won't read them all, but you'll see the Kansas law enforcement aircraft enhancement, just over 16 million. You also see some of the approved expenditures from our forfeiture accounts. One of those was our capital improvement, building the new evidence building out in Salina. We did receive some coronavirus emergency supplemental funding, which I'll talk about a little bit further in the presentation. And then we had some reductions in our motor vehicle fund and staffing and training due to the number of recruits that we had in this fiscal year. And slide 4, we'll move on to that. I just wanted to touch a little bit on some of the 2021 fiscal year project initiatives that the agency had going on. We had a lot of life safety equipment that we found needed to be replaced. Our tasers We did a replacement project for those. In-car video, our MDUs, the evidence building that I spoke of earlier. We're also updating the criminal justice information software package and radars, and also some rifle replacements as well. Those are some of our key initiatives for this fiscal year. On slide number 5, again, with some of the key variances from the 2020 actual versus 21 adjusted. The expenditures, salaries and wages, those increased by 2.5 million. There was a reduction in our benefit rates from 20 to 21, but you also see that our career progression plan, this is outside of the increase that we're requesting in the enhancement, the pay adjustment. So the normal career progression pay matrix, there was a almost $400,000 increase. You'll see the enhancement for 1.1 million. And then we're trying to fund some of the vacant positions. The agency has 880 positions that were approved by the legislature some years back. Not all of those are funded. We're slowly trying to populate some of those and fund additional positions. Contractual services increased by 796,000. Talked a little bit about some of the initiatives. So we have the CJIS software project. That's going to increase the maintenance by $290,000. OITS charges increased by about 80,000 over prior year. And then again, we have the air support enhancement. So we have that broken down by capital outlay and then contractual services. And then on slide 6, you'll see the commodities where it shows up again. Our commodities are increasing by about $138,000. We had uniform orders for the sworn personnel fiscal year 21. Other equipment, material, and parts, that is part of the account coding for the request, the enhancement for the air support unit. And then we had some minor reductions in some of the other areas, professional equipment, and some gasoline because of the lack of travel that we did due to coronavirus. Capital outlay and improvements, you'll see there's a large increase of the $16.9 million. 14.725 is for the aircraft, the actual equipment, the aircraft itself. And then pro and scientific equipment, this relates back to some of the key initiatives that I spoke of on the earlier slides. Capital improvement, part of the 5-year plan, that was up $2.4 million. And the main issue or main item there was our evidence building out in Salina. We also had grant transfers that increased, and the MCI enhancement that we'll talk about a little later in the presentation. Homeland Security, we had an increase in funds coming from the federal government there, and then the coronavirus, and again, I'll speak a little bit to that on future slides. Page number 7, we'll start the enhancements. So talk a little bit about the KHB pay plan. Provided some bullet points here to give you an idea. The agency started negotiations with the Troopers Association in early 2019. There was a consensus for a 2.5 increase for the covered members to begin in 2020 and then again in 2022. Final contract was signed in the spring of 2020. Funding request was included with the governor's rec for the 2.5 increase for state employees. However, with the pandemic, that was never voted on by the legislature, and I believe they term it below the line, so it got lost in there. So with the contract in place, the agency went ahead and initiated the increase. We were able to absorb that for the first 6 months. So this went into effect in January of 2020. So the agency has been able to absorb some of that through the staffing and training fund, but that we're not able to do that long term. The financial impact of that enhancement of the 2.5% and moving the pay matrix forward is 1.6 million in fiscal year 21 and 2.052 million in fiscal year 22. So that's one of our key enhancements we're asking for. On page 8, you'll see the second one is the aircraft enhancement that we've been talking a lot about here in the last few years. So this has increased the air unit fund by 16.05 million in 22 to accommodate the purchase of the replacement aircraft, upgrade equipment, and it also includes the trade-in for existing aircraft. So you'll see a little bit of the information on there, our current locations and what aircraft are at those locations. And important to note that we are the sole provider of law enforcement aviation in Kansas, but we also assisted over 148 agencies with needs through our aircraft unit. So on page 9, gives you an idea of what the updated plan looks like. Trading the 2005 Bell, trading the 1998 and the 1978 planes. And then below, you'll see purchase 2 new helicopters, 1 new Cessna Caravan, and keeping the 2012 planes until fiscal year 23. The third enhancement on page 10, that's our motor carrier inspector program called the MCI program. This is an increase of $696,000 for fiscal year 21 and 22. The MCI program came to KHP in 1989 from Department of Revenue. KHP partners with KDOT and Federal Highway Administration to make sure our roads are safe. And part of that is a weight enforcement program that the Kansas Highway Patrol administers and oversees and develops the budget for. It's a subrecipient relationship from the federal government through KDOT. And due to the timing of the budget, I think Aaron mentioned this, when the budget was submitted and by the time we received approval, we had a shortfall of 696 from what the federal government approved in our budget. So that's why we're asking for the additional funding for that program. Then on page 11, I provided for you expenditure by classification, again, salary, wages, contractual service, so on. And you'll see as a percent to our budget where that falls. For example, salary and wages in fiscal year 21 is 56%. That's low because we do have the capital outlay enhancements. So that brings that percent down. You'll see the same information for fiscal year 22. And again, it's a percent to total budget. Then again, on page 12, you'll see the revenue. And this is our KHP operations fund. This is the appropriated fund. All other expenditures come out of fee funds for the agency. I provided with you, so you'll see the fiscal year from 2007 to 2012, we did actually receive state general funds. And then beginning in 2013, fiscal year 2013, that all moved over to the highway fund. So our appropriated fund comes from the state highway fund. And that's also why the request for the funding for the enhancement came from the highway fund, because it is our primary source. So if you turn to page 13, a little easier to see with a graph, and you'll see where the funding's been for that appropriations through the years. You'll notice the last 4 bar graphs there. You have the 2021 requested, then you have the 2021 with the enhancement request. That's why it jumps up. And then same thing for 20 and 22. On page 14, the pandemic coronavirus funding, the agency received $975,000 from the federal funding. We use this for the remote dispatching system to allow redundancy for our dispatch group. The thought was if we have a pandemic hit dispatch, it's centralized right now. This gives us options to move out and continue to operate that with that system. Also, PPE in the amount of $165,000 was approved with that funding. The CARES Act, the agency received $788,000, and that was for a civilian mobility initiative, which was providing laptops for civilian in the agency so that they could work remotely. And just of note, the funding sources were one-time expenditures, and we did have about $54,000 we were reimbursed in 2020 for PPE for the agency. I did not have that on here, but. And with that, I'll stand for questions or open it up for, we have the Captain Vanderwhite in here.
Questions? Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that motor carrier inspections program, you're just saying that you have you have you've actually changed that number, which is now, it was 655, 751, which the governor did approve, and now you're saying it's 696, 652. Is this correct?
I think we lost him. Still there?
It must have been that bup, 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 bup of my voice that made it go out.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, my apologies. A little bit of technology opportunities here. So the number for the MCI program has been 696. I would have to look and see where the 651 number you're referring to.
655, 751, it's actually in the budget.
All right, so the fiscal year 21, we have the governor's change package of 696, 652, bringing our adjusted budget to 4.393 million.
Okay, so I guess I'm asking, are you sharing with us a larger figure than is actually in the agency request for 2021?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, no, that's why I'm a little bit confused with the number you're quoting, because I'm looking at it and the agency's request in that enhancement for the motor carrier inspection program has been 696, 652. So I need to do a little research on where we have a variance.
Well, that's why I'm asking this question, because I'm just asking, because this budget is the governor concurred with your agency's request for the motor carrier inspections. So this is covered. This is not an increase, is it? Over and above what we're seeing?
You are correct, Senator. You are correct that the governor did concur with that increase.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Can you hear me now? I didn't have my button pushed down. I'd ask the question about aids to locals on page 2. How does that process work? It's on page 2. I'm not looking at the numbers so much as just trying to understand what you do in that process. You still can't.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Third time's charm.
Right.
All right, Mr. Chairman, Senator, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
All right, Mr. Chairman, Senator. All right, so we'll attempt this again. Mr. Chairman, Senator, so the aid to locals, we receive funding through our Homeland Security Group, and then we will turn around through requests from local organizations like nonprofits, so on and so forth, and we will provide them aid for certain initiatives that they might have that are approved through the federal government.
Okay.
Anything else, Senator Fagg?
The only other question I'd ask on your aircraft, when I look at the years on what you have versus where you're going, 3 new ones in 1 year, I guess I'd question why you wouldn't want to space that out a little more, or what was the thought process there?
Mr. Chair, Senator, this is Captain Jason Vanderwatt. I run the aircraft unit. The thought process behind that is because the replacement of these aircraft has been delayed so long. That can has been kicked down the road. It takes a significant jump to get us back up to speed. Moving forward, we'd much rather have a stepped program, a phase-in program, but to get us where we need to be, it does take a large jump.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it. Committee, I think we might as well deliberate this one also. I know as far as the raises, we are looking those on a global basis. I think we should do that also with the Highway Patrol and Senator Clay. No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I have 3 items that I'd like to have added to the subcommittee report. One of them is to recommend the review of the history of law enforcement officer pay plans to correct an error that left the Capitol Police out of a series of raises. We can discuss the details in Ways and Means if you'd prefer. And then second, I would like to recommend proviso language that requires the Highway Patrol to use the KHP Training Academy for the training of all of their law enforcement officers, as has been done in the past. And then third, I would like the subcommittee to recommend removing the aircraft purchases in FY21 and the ongoing maintenance request in 22, with the funds being returned to the State Highway Fund while retaining the $700,000 for the upgraded FLIR in 21. And just to be absolutely clear, on the maintenance, it's the increase that would be due to the new aircraft being purchased, not deleting that line item entirely. So those 3 items I would move be added to the subcommittee recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Senator Fagg or Petty, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I just would, could you, or the maker of the motion, repeat number 3 so that I understand?
Sure. Number 3 removes the aircraft purchases entirely. They're the FY21 aircraft purchases, but retains the FLIR purchase, which is roughly $700,000 for the existing aircraft that requires a FLIR. And then those funds would be returned to the State Highway Fund. It's roughly $16 million.
Anything else? Seeing nothing? All in favor? Aye. Disapprove?
Are we voting on these additions? Okay.
Or for what we're, yeah.
I'm not supportive of number 3, so.
Okay, the aircraft, okay. Aaron, did you get that? Senator Petty is not supporting number 3 on our list, which is the aircraft.
I got it, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we move on to Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And for the overview, we'll have Aaron Clausen.
Do you want to do the?
Oh, sure, excuse me. Getting ahead of myself.
Yeah,
I've seen the last item on the list.
I'll move the Kansas Highway Patrol subcommittee report for 21 and 22 as amended, suggested.
Right. With our provisions.
Yeah, with the subcommittee provisions, yeah.
Okay. We have a motion, have a second?
Second.
Senator Fagg seconds. Any other discussion or questions? Senator Petty?
My only question would be, do we need to say that we're approving the governor's recommendations for 21 and 20.
Right.
Yeah, so the bill that we're amending is the governor's budget bill, so I don't know that we necessarily have to say that, but I'm happy to say it, that it's the governor's recommendation with our edits. So it's the base bill and then the items that the subcommittee recommends.
Thank you. I think that's what we've been doing on the others.
Okay. I think we're all on the same page. Okay. With that, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now we'll move on to Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and we'll have Aaron Clausen with KLRD give an overview. Aaron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll let you know that Director Thompson is actually in the room with you to give his presentation when it comes to that time. You should be on page 459 of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, which was established in 1939 as a division within the Office of the Attorney General. The mission of the KBI is to provide professional, investigative, and laboratory services to Kansas criminal justice agencies and to collect and disseminate criminal justice information for the purpose of promoting public safety and the prevention of crime in Kansas. Since these first few pages are summarial, I will stop quickly on page 461 because the 2020 legislature did approve $6.9 million off the state general fund that was allocated to LCC for the purchase of a new automated biometric identification system for the KBI in fiscal year 2021. You'll see that come up a couple of different times as we go through this analysis. I'll move right on to page 466 for the current year request. The 2020 legislature approved a state general fund budget of $27.6 million. A couple of the adjustments as noted below for you include $7 million reappropriated from 2020 that move into 2021. Part of that amount will be the automated biometric identification system, as I noted. There's an increase of $29,636 based on the reimbursement of SGF expenditures and for COVID-19 related expenditures, and then a decrease of $148,758 as a result of the governor's July 1st allotment. These change the approved amount to $34,558,000. Changes to the approved, you'll see in the table. The agency requests a revised estimate of $46.4 million, including $34.5 from the State General Fund for operating and capital improvements in 21. It's an all funds decrease of $995,301 or 2.1%, and an SGF decrease of $29,635 or 0.1% below the 21 approved amount. The decrease in SGF from the approved amount is due to the coronavirus relief funding reimbursed expenditures that were part of the governor's allotment, and the agency notes the decrease in all of the funds is due to the funding considerations of the current and potential budget reductions that the agency kind of prepared for in their budget in order to reduce the impact of these reductions. The 21 estimate includes 353.5 FTE positions, a decrease of 3 from the approved amount. I break down on the bottom of page 467 by major category of expenditure, and then 468 you will see in the middle of the page the governor's recommendation, which the governor recommends 21 expenditures of $46.6 million, including $34.4 from the state general fund. It's an all funds increase of $199,130 or 0.5%, including an SGF decrease of $84,210 or 0.3% from the agency's 21 revised estimate. The governor's recommendation accounts for coronavirus relief funds and then lapses the scrap metal repository fund. You'll see on the bottom of page 468 the governor's allotments, which include CAPER's D&D moratorium, as well as the CRF swap, which is basically an exchange of funding provided from the coronavirus relief, which would then, of course, reduce the reliance on the state general fund. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move in 2022 on page 469. The agency requests an operating budget of $37.2 million, including $24.9 from the state general fund for 2022. Its request is an all funds decrease of $6.6 million or 15.1% and an SGF decrease of $7 million or 21.9% below the 21 revised estimate. The agency requests 353.5 FTE positions, no change from the 21 revised estimate. This decrease is due to expenditures for the purchase of the new ABIS, which is the automated biometric identification system, and other coronavirus 19 funding in the 2021 budget that don't reoccur in 2022. I've broken down on the bottom of page 469 by object of expenditure. Continuing on to page 470, you will see the large decrease occurs in the capital outlay expenditures category. You will note that on page 470 is the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends operating budgets of $36.1 million, including $23.9 million from the state general fund, which is a decrease of $1.1 million or 2.8%, and all from the SGF below the agency's request. This is due to the governor's partial adoption of the agency's reduced resources budget, which is included on the bottom of page 470. The reduced resources budget the agency submitted totals $2.3 million, all from the state general fund, for a 10% reduction to expenditures in 2022. The agency states that this would primarily come from reducing or basically holding positions open longer than normally they would. And the breakdown is included on page 471. But the governor actually goes in and changes that reduced amount to $1 million, essentially, and off the state general fund for fiscal year 2022. On page 472, you'll see the governor's salary and wage adjustment box with the longevity payments noted in the middle of the page. And then you'll see on page 473, the agency's funding sources, as well as I have a breakdown on the bottom of 473 of the record check fee fund analysis, which the agency, of course, reports as they do fee fund analysis do fingerprint check analysis for other agencies. And then as well as the Criminal Justice Information System is included on page 474. I will note that the special funding support that was added to the agency of $1 from the Division of Vehicles Motorization Surcharge collected is basically allowed to go up to $1 million for 2020 and 2021. The governor's budget does include that for 2022. With that, I will move on to the agency's capital improvements request on page, should be on page 496. I will let you know the Joint Committee on State Building Construction did concur with the governor's recommendation in 2021 and 2022. The request essentially involves $2.6 million off of the state general fund for capital improvements, which includes $2.5 million SGF for the Forensic Science Laboratory in 21, as well as $100,000 SGF for rehab and repair. The governor does concur with these agencies' requests for capital improvements in 2021. And then the 2022 request is $2.8 million off from the state general fund. It's an increase of $130,000 or 5% above the 21 revised estimate due to increased debt service principal payments, which are broken down as $2.7 million SGF for debt service principal for the Washburn Laboratory, and then $100,000 for rehab and repair in 2022. The governor concurs with the agency's capital improvements expenditures in fiscal year 2022. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions and prepare for Director Thompson when he is ready.
Thank you. Questions? I had one, just a second, I can find my page. Aaron, on page 474.
Okay.
It says additionally, $1 of each division of vehicles motorization surcharge collected is required to be remitted to this fund, but the total cannot exceed $1 million. Have we been doing this in the past?
Mr. Chairman, just to let you know, the modernization surcharge used to be to the benefit of the state highway fund, but during budget changes and such like that, I believe over the past year, it has been changed to a $1 of that $4 goes specifically to this fund.
Okay, so it's one of $4. Okay.
Correct.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 470, when you go to the FY20.
Sorry, Senator, if you'd turn on your mic.
I'm sorry. I must have had it on, turned it off. If you go to page 470 on forensic labs under that reduced resources, my question is, when you do that kind of work and you have things that come in, you have to do them. I mean, how can they reduce that much? I guess would be my question, or that might be something for the other person that's going to present here.
I will let the director provide more detail on that, but my understanding was
Okay.
that the positions were allowed to be, or were held open longer than initially expected.
Okay. Okay.
Any
we'll
other
have him.
questions for Aaron? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Director of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, Kurt Thompson. Welcome to committee, Kurt.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I would.
You're welcome to take your mask off if you like.
That might be helpful to aid in communication here, if you don't mind. Thank you.
That's fine.
First off, let me say for the record, my name's Kirk Thompson. I currently serve as the Director of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And I want to thank you all for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. I think my presentation will be significantly shorter. Our needs this year are a little bit different than they have been in the past. So before I begin diving into the budget, if you will, I do want to thank you as this committee and the legislature as a whole in supporting our public safety mission over the years. It's a very important role that we serve in providing support to our local law enforcement partners, 400 plus of them across the state, and 105 county prosecutors across the state. So it's very important, and your support is greatly appreciated. And I think the last thing that I would say in that regard is that our agency doesn't operate in a vacuum, if you will, because we do provide significant support to all of our law enforcement partners. And so we're involved in almost every aspect of the criminal justice system in Kansas, either through investigations of major crime, providing of forensic services to all of our other law enforcement agencies across the state, as well as providing record and information repository services for all of our law enforcement partners and the remainder of the criminal justice system. Like everyone has mentioned, 2020 was an especially difficult year for us, and yet despite the challenges that were out there, we were really able to make some significant enhancements to our operations. And since I've spoken to this committee and others about our needs over time and have asked you about supporting some of these initiatives, I felt it was important to give you a very quick update on what we were able to accomplish last year with your support. First, as Aaron mentioned, we were able to obtain funding, legislative funding, in the amount of $6.9 million to replace a very antiquated automated fingerprint identification system, which serves as the basis or the backbone of the criminal history record system in Kansas. So we are going to be able to replace that system. We're in the process of contract right now because the purchasing process is subject to a non-disclosure agreement. I'm very limited in what I can say, but we are expecting to have a contract finalized by March of this year, and we will begin work on this very complex implementation, which will take about 2 fiscal years to achieve. But again, thank you very much for your attention to this particular issue, and it was very much appreciated. The second thing I'd mention to you is that we had applied for 2 different buckets of money with regard to coronavirus enhancement funding. The first was through the CARES funding in the amount of $283,340, and CESF funding in the amount of approximately $520, and that's basically a federal justice assistance grant. Those two buckets of money allowed us to make significant enhancements to our ability to work remotely, which honestly will be very helpful, not just as we are dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, but it's going to be very helpful as we move forward. As you know, we work throughout the state, often in remote locations, so our abilities were significantly enhanced by these funds. And I can get into some level of detail a little later on if you are interested in the specific things that were acquired. But generally, they were in the area of personal protective equipment for our agents and forensic scientists. There was a great deal of technology that was acquired to allow for remote access and collaborations, which improved our ability to work in those remote distributed environments. With regard to our facilities, I'm pleased to inform you that we've completed the first phase of a significant laboratory enhancement for our Great Bend facility. That was just short of $1 million, and this will create some significant efficiencies within that operation that serves western Kansas, and it'll also serve to address some very straightforward problems of leaking roofs, windows, those kinds of things in that particular facility. Laboratory fee funds were used for that particular project, and I'll talk a little bit more about our concern about some of these fee funds as we go along. We were able to open a field office in Garden City to support our law enforcement partners out in the western part of the state a little bit better than we could out of our Great Bend office. This is about a 5,000 square foot facility. It will house and support about 13 investigative personnel. The interesting thing about this was it was an office that was utilized by the Drug Enforcement Administration, and they vacated the office, so it was set up for an enforcement operation. It was a very smooth transition, and once we got back in, we convinced the Drug Enforcement Administration to come back to western Kansas, so they will be in that facility with us, along with a federal, state, local task force that is funded by the HIDA program, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Program. So we will have a significant investigative presence to include Homeland Security investigations at some point in the future, but that will be a significant enhancement to criminal justice operations out west. We had asked for assistance in providing a replacement air conditioner for our general headquarters building here in Topeka. As some of you may remember, it's a building built back in 1929. It was remodeled in 1984, and it's got great bones, but it just takes some work every once in a while to keep it up. And so we were able to acquire the new air conditioner. It was installed, and it is functioning as of last fall. In 2019, House Bill 2549 was passed, and it established the Kansas Asset Seizure and Forfeiture Repository. KBI was asked to build that particular repository and collect information about law enforcement agencies and their seizure of assets under the Kansas asset forfeiture laws. There was some concern in many quarters about how those laws were being applied, how they were being used. So you requested data about how that was being done, and what this repository will do is provide that much more granular data for analysis by policymakers such as yourself, agency managers, the public, researchers. Our very first annual report will be published as a result of the collection of that data in the very near future. And so that project has been completed. This year, there's some concern in many quarters about police use of force. And so with support of the Attorney General's office and our law enforcement partners, we are creating a repository that will collect granular data about use of force data by Kansas law enforcement personnel. And we believe that this kind of data is just critical to inform and guide policymakers. It's critical to provide public transparency and inform the public generally about use of force matters. So this particular reporting mechanism will be developed as a part of the Kansas incident-based reporting system, which is currently under renovation by our agency. And you'll see more about that in a couple of years when we will be asking for some significant enhancements to build high-level analytics and data management into that system. But by making the use of force reporting repository a part of that, it becomes more routine for Kansas law enforcement officers who are required to submit incident-based reports to the agency for collection and statistical analysis. This will just become a part of that overall process that we believe that they are already used to using. We believe that that repository module will be available and will be up and operational by December 31st of this current year. In 2020, the legislature provided funding to establish the first cybercrimes unit at the KBI and 8 personnel. That unit is now up and accepting cases. It's a very technical and evolving environment that they're working in, but they've decided to focus on 4 particular areas. Be.
Having cyber attack. That was one of his 4.
Figure out what was. I greatly apologize for that. So the 4 areas that we're really focused on right now in cybercrime investigations are network intrusions in businesses, denial of service attacks against businesses, ransomware, and then schemes to compromise business email systems for the purpose of fraud or theft. So that's our focus with that particular unit right now. The legislature asked for, I shouldn't say it in that way, the legislature approved the production of hemp in Kansas. And what that did was require a necessity on our part in our forensic laboratories to be able to quantitate the amount of THC that exists within either marijuana or hemp for the purpose of determining whether or not the hemp is legal under Kansas law and eliminating any confusion between what would be legal and illegal substances. So that particular device, we were able to acquire that. It's been installed. Our personnel have been trained. The procedures for utilizing that device have been validated. And so we are rolling out to our law enforcement partners how that testing will be accomplished at this point in time. So I just wanted to throw a few of those things out there and let you know that we haven't really been sitting on our hands during the COVID situation. We have been doing our best to continue to enhance our capacities and service levels and fulfill the requests that the legislature has made of us for these various systems. So now let me turn real quickly to our 22 budget request and just say that we concur with the governor's recommendation and the allotment proposal. The allotment was originally at 10% or about 2.3 million of state general funds. We did appeal that amount and it was reduced to 4.5% or just slightly over $1 million. So I would ask for the support of this committee for the governor's recommendations as presented. We would also ask, as you continue your deliberations, that you support the statewide proposed 2.5% compensation adjustment for state employees. One of the biggest issues that we have, and you've heard me speak of this before, is recruiting and retention of our qualified personnel. And although we have some very specific niche type employees with forensic scientists, agents, that kind of thing, we do have a lot of our employees who have been passed over in the past for compensation adjustments. And for our organization to work effectively, we need all of those employees. So we would like to say that continued investment in all levels of our organization is important to accomplishing our mission. Bring up one point that where there may be a little bit of a disagreement with the budget proposal is one of the things that we were asked to do last year was to create a scrap metal repository. There was significant concern in many areas of the state about the amount of metal that was being stolen, scrap metal being stolen, and then sold to various vendors, dealers across the state. So the idea was to track metals coming into those dealers and then try to determine whether any of that material was stolen. That project was given to us. We were able to, through an agreement with the Information Network of Kansas, basically not use any of that appropriated money. We used grant dollars and were able to bring that system online with the help of Inc. and one of their contractors, which left roughly $80,000 to $100,000 left from that project. What will be required going forward is $30,000 a year for maintenance for keeping that repository going. $30,000 of that pool of money was left with us to pay the cost for maintenance in 2021. However, the rest of the money was lapsed and leaves us without funding for that particular maintenance amount in FY22. And we had hoped to use some of that money to pay the 22 maintenance costs, and that would take us up to the point where that particular legislation will sunset and it will have to be reviewed at that point. So we would ask for some consideration in the restoration of $30,000. That would be very helpful to us. I think it goes to your question, Senator, that you were asking about the way that we were able to reach the allocation. And we did so by leaving open 16 positions that we intended to fill, plus making some significant operational cuts and cutting about $100,000 total from our facilities, refurb, and rehab budget. There is an impact to leaving these positions open. There is an impact to not having someone out there doing the work. But we believe by engaging this very early we could minimize that. So we started as soon as we saw that there was going to be some fiscal issues with the state, and when the governor's office suggested that there would be looking at allocations. One of the things that is most concerning to us about what's happened with the coronavirus and what's happened to state revenues in general is that we felt that it was important for us to recognize those fiscal realities, and we decided to stall the implementation of our strategic plan for the next 5 years. We just didn't feel it was appropriate at this point in time to seek significant enhancements for some of these programs. So we just basically picked them up and moved them a year down the road, in some cases more than a year, to address that concern. In the front of the briefing books, which we delivered to everyone, hopefully you've had a chance to look, but right after the introductory letter, there's a document in there that summarizes what our strategic plan is. And generally it deals with the current year that we're in, goes forward 5 years to let everyone know what programs, projects, or needs we see that far out, and then goes backwards to show the successes or when projects have been completed, that kind of thing. So I'd ask, if you haven't had time to take a look at that, just take a look at some of those outstanding needs that we have, which have not been minimized at all or have not decreased in importance, but we just did not feel we were going to bring them forward this year in these circumstances. One last thing, and then I will stand for questions, and that is the impact that has occurred to our agency fee funds. We have fee funds that help to operate the laboratory and operate some of our information and identification services. The pandemic created an impact to those funds, which in turn created an impact to our ability to handle many of the smaller programs, smaller issues within our budget. Right now, as of now, we're about $215,000 short of where we would normally be. If you add the extra $30,000 in with regard to the scrap metal, we're almost at $250,000 shortfall. We're not asking for funding at this point to make that up. Just want to make you aware that we are struggling a little bit with the reduction of our fee funds, and if things don't pick up, if you will, we may have to come back to you next year and ask for some additional support in some of those areas. So let me stop at that point. It's been a long morning for you all, also hearing all of these issues and dollar amounts, but I would ask that you take a few minutes to look at the briefing books. We hope that they give you some idea and answer some of your basic questions about our mission, our organizational structure, critical projects, our strategy. And I would close by saying thank you for your time, and that if you ever have any questions with regard to our agency, please feel free to call us at any point, and we'll do everything we can to provide that information for you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Kurt. Questions for Kurt? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you talk fee fund, I'm just trying to understand this a little bit. If you get a call from City of Topeka and you want them to do some work, or they need some investigative work, you come in and do that. Do you collect any money from the city? Do you recoup any of your costs from municipalities versus the state?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we do not. From an investigative perspective, from the provision of criminal justice laboratory services, or from the provision of services related to identification, criminal histories, those kinds of things.
Okay.
We do not charge back to the criminal justice community. What those fee funds, they are a result of private citizens, where there is a requirement to do a background or license, to have no criminal history. That's where we charge, because there is a charge for us that we have to pay to the FBI for some of that record information. But we do not charge criminal justice agencies for criminal justice services.
Other questions? Senator Petty?
I was just trying to look through the budget, Kurt. In the fee funds, when you talk about the levels, so you can make this clear for me, you still have a balance in those fee funds? You're just talking about the amount of balance that you have.
That's correct. The fee funds we use for many of the projects that we initiate. So we look several years to the future about what commitments are made out of those particular fee funds and what they're going to look like toward the end of each of the years that we are projecting. And we normally try to budget to a point where we have sufficient reserves to pick up any kind of emergency operations. But we try to commit the money that's available to us to our mission to the extent possible. So sometimes there are fairly high balances in some of those fee funds because some of the projects we engage, for example, the laboratory renovation, that was almost $1 million. So of course we saved up those fee funds, those laboratory fee funds, to a point where we could move forward with that project without coming back to the legislature for enhancement funding.
Senator Petty?
Thank you. And I may be wrong about this, so you can correct me. Because we have over the last, over the last 8 years, increased the number of people that have to have fingerprint checks, and which increases the number of background checks. So that's one of the areas that you are getting fees from. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so those fees come in, and that when we have to hire new people to take on those new tasks or need new equipment or resources to do those additional things, that's where the funding for those kinds of enhancements come from.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it.
Thank you, members of the committee, very much.
Committee, we might as well do our deliberation on the KBI's budget also. I would suggest that we're going to do the global pay raises like we are in all agencies. And I suggest we we look at the $30,000 for the scrap metal maintenance at Omnibus.
That would be for 22.
Correct. Everybody in agreement with that? Anything else anyone would like to add? Senator Clays? Okay. So, do you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the Kansas Bureau of Investigation FY 21 and 22 budget subcommittee recommendations on top of the governor's recommendations. Yeah, there you go.
Motion second by Senator Petty. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. With that, committee, thank you. I appreciate, go ahead, Senator Petty.
I wanted to ask you, Mr. Chairman, on the first two budgets that we went through, we actually didn't ever do a motion. We just agreed. I just wondered if you want us to do that, or if you will just, we had a consensus, but we didn't actually do a motion.
Let me ask the agency, or excuse me, we had Merle on that.
Correct.
Merle, are you still there?
I suspect he's not.
He might not be available, but I am, sir, and if you would
Okay.
be so kind as since you are there to make that motion, that would be great.
Okay, let's just go ahead and make the motion, and Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe we did corrections in the Sentencing Commission, is that correct?
Correct.
I'll just make a single motion that we approve the Sentencing Commission and Department of Corrections budgets, including all facilities for FY 21 and 22 as recommended by the governor and as amended by the subcommittee.
Second by Senator Petty. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Motion's approved. Okay, well, thank you, committee. It's been a long morning for you, and I appreciate you sticking around and getting these done. Thank you. With that, we're adjourned.